Let's just jump right in. You've seen the thumbnail and the title. You know what this is. I hate Team America World Police. It is one of the worst films I've ever seen. This film is vile. And to give you a little clue as to how intense my hatred is, I'd like to remind everyone that the original title for this video was I fucking hate Team America World Police. Also, Trey Parker and Matt Stone are pretentious, self-righteous douchebags. Had to change it because YouTube doesn't like curse words in the thumbnail. Also, that title was kinda too long. So, groundwork. Parker and Stone are a comedy duo best known for creating South Park and the Book of Mormon. In 2004, they wrote, directed, and starred in Team America World Police, a comedy film made with puppets designed to homage the style of the TV show Thunderbirds. Except, R-rated. According to Wikipedia, the film satirizes action film archetypes, American militarism, and the global implications of the politics of the United States. Although, I'm not gonna lie, I take umbrage with the term satirizes. Satire is a form of critique, and I don't really think a film whose core message is, the American military is cool and fuck you if you criticize it, really counts as satire. I guess it satirizes North Korea, except not really, because it doesn't have anything insightful to say. Oh! It satirizes Hollywood. It isn't a good satire, but it is a satire of Hollywood that criticizes Hollywood for not liking war crimes. Really important criticism, guys. To be honest, I'm not really a fan of Parker and Stone. I mean, obviously I hate this movie, see the title, but I also don't like South Park too much. I mean, I've only seen a few episodes of it, but none of them have been good. I don't know, maybe I need to watch 25 years of smug bitching to understand the brilliance that is South Park. And honestly, based on how the comments on my video essays usually go, all of the criticism I receive will be for saying I don't like South Park, because none of you fuckers are going to watch more than 30 seconds. I could say whatever I want in the rest of this video, and it does not matter. Most of you are not going to watch a 2-hour political lecture. The changed title does have an unexpected benefit of allowing me to include one more douchebag whose contributions often go underpraised. This film was co-wrote by Pam Brady, #girlboss, who is responsible for a lot of the major plot elements, like the idea of mocking celebrities. Because if there is one thing that ensures your film will age well, it's potshots at whatever random famous people happen to be in the news that week. Team America was created during the fever pitch of the War on Terror. It is a film that exists, if not primarily, at least in part, to make a political argument about the War on Terror and the United States' role in global politics. It's a film that is largely about the invasion of Iraq. It may have begun development before the invasion, but it is also a film by the team that regularly makes an episode of South Park in 6 days. This film was rewritten and reworked for years until, in 2004, it was released. This bombastic film that ends with a rousing speech about the importance of American interventionism. And yes, I know it's a comedy movie. It is a parody of action blockbusters. It is satirical, but it isn't just a comedy. It's a film that exists because its writers had something to say about the War on Terror. If they wanted to make a dumb, gross-out parody of Bruckheimer movies, then fine, go ahead. But Parker, Stone, and Brady wanted the film to be more than that. They wanted the film to be more, to have something to say. And what it says is one of the worst things that I have ever heard. Permit me the hours this essay will take, because this film's message deserves thorough critique and analysis. It deserves to be deconstructed. It deserves to have its ideals torn down and mocked. And that is what I intend to do here today. Fuck it, enough prelude, let's just jump into the shitty film.
What would you do if you were asked to give up your dreams for freedom?
The film begins in Paris. It's a calm afternoon when suddenly, terrorists! A quartet of generic Muslim terrorists, armed with guns and a suitcase nuke, show up to ruin everyone's day. Where are these terrorists from? We won't find out until halfway through the film, and oh boy is it bad. What are they after? I don't know. Before these terrorists can cause much harm, our heroes swoop in. Team America, World Police. That's the name of the film. Team America flies into Paris in red, white, and blue helicopters, sirens blazing, ready to save the day. Hey, real quick, what are Team America? Like, they're the US military, right? I mean, they act like a military organization. You know, American cops don't really go to France to arrest terrorists. In fact, if we accept the fiction of this film, Team America seems to be the entirety of the US military in this universe. Other nations have soldiers, but the only American soldiers we see are the titular team. The only hints of a military existing in this film about the War on Terror are mentions of the invasion of Iraq, although I guess Team America could have been behind that too. But on the other hand, they are definitely police. They tell the terrorists that they're under arrest. Not really sure how they have jurisdiction, but then again, I'm probably overthinking things. According to an interview with Salon, Team America is a stand-in for both the cops and the military, as well as Americans as a whole. And I mean, there are a lot of overlap in things you can say about cops and things you can say about the military. They're both people working for the state whose job is to stop quote-unquote bad people. But, of course, the big difference between cops and soldiers is that cops, in theory, are supposed to stop bad people by arresting them and taking them to jail so they can get a fair trial. Soldiers deal with bad people by shooting them in the face. Like, the reason it's really, really bad the cops are becoming more militarized and act like they're soldiers is because soldiers aren't known for treating enemy combatants with mercy. And if cops are soldiers, then every single person in this country is a possible enemy combatant who should be dealt with through relentless force. And we do see part of this in the film. Despite being cops, Team America never arrest anyone. They solve every solution through incredible violence. Speaking of which, the team engages in a shootout with the terrorists. During this shootout, one of them misses with his rocket launcher and hits the Eiffel Tower, knocking it over. Oops! One of the terrorists flees into the Louvre, so Team America calls in an airstrike and blows it up. Guys, you just did a 9/11. For context, when I say did a 9/11, I mean they committed an act of terrorism with around 3,000 civilian fatalities. Like, hold on, quick math. 15,000 visitors daily, open for 9 hours, let's say about 2 hours per visit. And I mean, there are so many different factors to make an accurate conclusion, but yeah, that's around 3,000 fatalities. Let me repeat that. The film begins with our protagonists doing a 9/11. And shit, that's excluding the people who were killed by stray bullets or by the Eiffel Tower collapsing. And I mean, the fatalities are the big thing, but also, you know, the destruction of so much art and culture shouldn't be scoffed at. And hey, I know what you're gonna say. It's a parody! They're mocking bad action movies! And I understand that. I understand that. But I need to make something clear. This film ultimately concludes with the idea that Team America are the good guys and that we need them. To quote Parker, cops are dicks, you fucking hate cops, but you need them. And I don't know, it feels weird that this film, whose whole message is in defense of state violence, begins with an act of state violence so extreme that even the most diehard, thin blue line chuds would denounce it. Now, there's another part of this opening battle that needs to be talked about. The nuke. You can tell this film was made in 2004 because they exclusively refer to nuclear weapons as WMDs. Within the film's narrative, Team America is justified, even though they are reckless and violent, even though they kill far more people than any terrorist will in this movie. Because the Islamic terrorists have nukes. Or chemical weapons, I guess. Like, the Bush administration constantly said WMDs instead of chemical weapons, even though they were ostensibly talking about chemical weapons, because they wanted Americans to think nukes. They're nukes in this film, at the very least. And that is one aspect of this film that is aged poorly. This film was made shortly after the invasion of Iraq, which was justified on the argument that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. And, he didn't. The Bush administration made that up. And, sure, Fine, I can understand believing something if you are repeatedly told it by the president and haven't seen much counter-evidence. I don't really think this film's writers deserve that benefit of the doubt, given a scene later in the movie, but fine. If you believe that the Iraqi government possessed nuclear weapons, then sure, I guess the idea of terrorists having WMDs makes sense. Except, no, it doesn't. Because Saddam Hussein wasn't a terrorist. He was a dictator. And I'm not downplaying that. Saddam Hussein was a monster. But there is a big difference in what dictators do and what terrorists do. Terrorists blow up buildings in countries they don't like. Dictators order mass executions of dissidents within their own countries. Both are atrocities, but they're very different types of atrocities. Even if Saddam Hussein had nukes, and again, he didn't, it is ridiculous to think he would have sent Iraqi soldiers to France to set off a nuke. I'll talk about this more when we get to Kim Jong-il, but dictators are defined by their desire to hold on to power. If Hussein set off a nuke in Paris, it would have been an act of war that resulted in Iraq being turned to dust in nuclear hellfire. That only would have happened if Saddam Hussein was a suicidally stupid cartoon character. Oh. Right. Now, to be fair, there is a reason you might think Hussein would have given nukes to terrorists. Because he was responsible for 9/11, right? Yeah, no, that's another thing the Bush administration made up. And 82% of Americans believe he assisted bin Laden? What the fuck? Honestly, it's weird that two self-described libertarians will take the stance that the US government should be allowed to kill people because they said they are allowed to kill people without any question or skepticism. But, sure, if you believe two different lies, then yes. The idea that the United States should be allowed to commit obscene amounts of violence because terrorists have WMDs makes an amount of sense. But when you step back into reality, when we look at this film 18 years later, when the fact that Bush was a lying war criminal cunt is obvious, then what are you left with? If the terrorists don't have nukes, then vaporizing the LURV is monstrous. Like, the US military kills people and leaves collateral damage in real life. Never 3,000 people at once, or at least not recently, but over the course of the war on terror, the US military killed that many people more than 100 times over. And it's important to keep that in mind, especially when this film, again, exists to provide excuses for those murders. Jesus fuck, I'm already up to 2,000 words. This is going to be a long one. So anyway, as Team America are fighting the terrorists, the team's leader Carson is shot and killed. Needing to replace him, Team America's sponsor Spotsworth recruits Gary Johnston, a Broadway actor acting in Rent. In Lease, a musical that ends with the musical number, Everyone Has AIDS. After bringing Gary to his limo, Spotsworth explains why Team America's mission is so important. To quote, "Some people want you dead. They're called terrorists, Gary, and they hate everything about you." To which Gary replies, "Why? What did I do to them? I'm just a Broadway actor." And Spotsworth says, "It's not who you are, Gary, it's what you stand for. And every single minute of every single day, the terrorists are planning new ways to kill you and everyone else who lives in a free country." And I'm going to come back to those lines later, but that's a very simplistic view on terrorism. Spotsworth takes Gary back to the team's base inside Mount Rushmore, and side note, that's a real thing. Like, I know the idea of a massive government base inside Mount Rushmore sounds like something out of a cheesy 80s cartoon, but no, that is something the designer actually wanted to do. To quote Business Insider, where the frontal lobe of Abraham Lincoln's brain would be, there is a secret room that contains the text of America's most important documents. The designer envisioned an 800-foot stairway leading to a grand hall measuring 80 feet by 100 feet behind the president's faces. Above the entrance to the hall would hang a bronze eagle with a wingspan of 38 feet. The hall would contain busts of famous Americans and list U.S. contributions to science, art, and industry. They never did build the massive hall inside Rushmore, but in 1998 they dug out a small room where they keep copies of the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and biographies of the 4 presidents featured. Because, if there was anything a giant statue of Abraham Lincoln needed, it was a hole in the back of the head. I mean, to be fair, it's actually built a few feet away from the head, but that doesn't really work for the joke now, does it? Gary meets with the rest of Team America, characters who I don't really give a shit about. Like, one of the team members has a chip on his shoulder and hates Gary, and there's a love triangle plotline that's really bland, but recapping that stuff would just make this video even more bloated. I would like to note that, stepping away from the politics for a moment to talk about this film as a film, it does suffer sometimes from being bad action movie, but with puppets. Like, it works in some scenes, like the action scenes that are just puppets being slammed together. But there are scenes like the love triangle bullshit where they just do a boring movie but with puppets, and it isn't enough to keep the movie from being boring. I suppose I should also talk about the comedy aspect of this comedy film. And I hate to say it because I despise this film, but it is at times a genuinely funny film. There are lots of great jokes in this movie, like before Gary is sent on a mission, you get the classic cyanide pill for killing yourself scene, except Spotsworth gives him a hammer instead. Or the line, "It'll be like 9/11 times 100. My God, that's 91,100. On the other hand, there are a lot of scenes that are painfully unfunny because the film's writers were more concerned with being racist than with being creative or original. But sure, overall it's a pretty funny film. But to be frank, this video isn't about the jokes. It's about the message that comes in between the jokes. Gary is introduced to his love interest, Lisa. He asks her, "Why is it my responsibility to do something?" Lisa says, "Because, like it or not, you're the only one with the power to do something." Gary, unsatisfied, leaves, leading Lisa to say, "Just remember, your freedom is at stake too." This leads to a scene where Gary drives around famous landmarks in DC. Not sure how he got there so quickly from South Dakota now that I think about it. As the song "Freedom Isn't Free" plays. And my God, this is a perfect encapsulation of what post-9/11 country music was. This bland, repetitive, "support the troops" nonsense that really didn't have anything eloquent to say. But I'd like to note that although the song is a parody, its message is true within the context of the film. Like, the film makes it clear that its writers believe that America can only remain a democracy through overwhelming military force against other countries. But I would like to argue against that point. The US military did not fight to keep us free during the War on Terror, okay? The United States would not have ceased to be a democracy in a world where Bush didn't invade Iraq. The continued democracy of the United States has never been in danger of being destroyed by a foreign power in any of our lives. There are dangers to our democracy, yes, but those dangers are almost exclusively domestic. Now, of course, when you bring this up, people who talk about how freedom isn't free fall back to the justification that they are actually talking about the freedom of people in other countries. And no, they aren't. The Marine Todd copypasta is, "God was busy protecting America's military, who are out protecting your right to say stupid shit like that." Not, "God was busy protecting America's military, who are out there attempting to replace the government of Iraq with a more democratic one, similar to our own democracy, which is not in any danger from foreign powers." That shitty Steve Breen comic isn't, "This man can't stand because he wanted to give rights to the people of Iraq, except for the ones he and his buddies murdered." But, sure. From time to time, the US military does fight for the rights of people abroad. World War II is the big example people like to give, and the atrocities of the Axis powers make American entry into the war commendable. Not to say that there weren't problems with how the US handled the war, like mass murdering hundreds of thousands of civilians in a country about to surrender, even though your own generals are telling you it's pointless, is fucking monstrous. They should not have done that. But that doesn't take away from the fact that some actions by the United States during the war led to the overthrowing of several dictatorships and saved countless lives. And the US has been riding that high for decades. The problem is, most wars aren't against the Nazis. And yes, a lot of the people the US has opposed over the years have been dictators, but so have many of the leaders the US has propped up. Latin America gives the most blatant examples: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Guatemala, Nicaragua. Again and again, the United States overthrew democratically elected leaders and replaced them with violent dictators. Freedom isn't free? Yeah, because you bastards keep murdering people to stop them from having rights. Take Chile, for example. The people of Chile democratically elected the socialist Salvador Allende. Allende attempted to nationalize Chile's copper mines, which were owned by American companies. Richard Nixon and the CIA didn't like this. They provided vital support for the military coup that bombed the presidential palace. Fittingly, they did it on 9/11. Allende killed himself as armed fascists broke through the barriers to assassinate him. Placed in power by American fuckery was dictator Augusto Pinochet, a violent fascist who imprisoned and tortured 36,948 people, executing 3,095 of them. Pinochet's reign was defined by the mass murder of political opponents, primarily leftists, but often anyone at all who opposed his rule, or were even suspected of opposing it. Or if Chile isn't bad enough for you, how about Argentina? I mean, sure, Isabel Perón was far from a good leader, but still, the ensuing bloodshed is unforgivable. The United States assisted both with the military coup that brought Jorge Videla to power and with the mass killings he carried out against his people. The US-backed government of Argentina executed communist sympathizers, students, unionists, journalists, and anyone and everyone they suspected of opposing the regime and its US-demanded neoliberal economy. In total, 30,000 people, that's 10 9/11s by the way, 30,000 people were disappeared and killed by the government. The Argentinian Dirty War is also famous for the government kidnapping pregnant women, murdering them as soon as their babies are born, and then having those babies be adopted by people close to the government. How about Guatemala? Over the years, various corrupt Guatemalan leaders sold massive chunks of the country to United Fruit, a banana company now called Chiquita. US-backed dictator and fan of Hitler Jorge Ubico let United Fruit pay no taxes on Guatemalan land and encouraged the company to underpay workers to keep the country trapped in poverty. In 1944, Ubico was overthrown and a democracy was established. In 1951, the people of Guatemala elected Jacobo Arbenz, a leftist who actually thought Guatemalans should own their own country. Arbenz bought back most of the land that had been sold to United Fruit, paying them based on what United Fruit had said the land was worth on their tax filings, and gave the land back to the people of Guatemala. Enter brothers John and Alan Dulles, Secretary of State and CIA Director respectively, a pair of shit stains who decided to overthrow the government of Guatemala. Before taking control of the US government, these brothers worked as lawyers for United Fruit. Some of my sources referred to Allen as having been part of United Fruit's board of directors, although other sources I found disputed that. I don't know what to believe. Under the guidance of the Dulles brothers and President Eisenhower, the CIA gave money, guns, and planes to military officer Carlos Castillo Armas, who... Oh, Jesus! That's what he looked like?! Really? The fucking Hitler mustache? Really? You gave that guy power! The CIA armed Castillo Armas so he could launch a coup. They also launched a massive radio propaganda campaign and had the US Navy form a blockade around Guatemala. Castillo Armas' army began an invasion. Arbenz, knowing his country could do nothing against the might of the US, resigned. Castillo Armas stole back Guatemalan land and arrested thousands for trying to oppose this, as well as thousands of political opponents over the years. Castillo Armas was eventually assassinated, but the horrors in Guatemala continued as the country descended into a brutal 36-year-long civil war. And, of course, the United States couldn't keep their hands out of this war. The Guatemalan Civil War is far beyond the scope of this video, but I think we have enough time to bring up the genocide. During the lengthy war between the authoritarian Guatemalan military and Marxist insurgents, leftist guerrillas used the mountains of Guatemala as their base of operations. These mountains were also home to the indigenous Maya people. The Guatemalan military began a campaign of systematic slaughter against the Mayans, Because, hey, they live in the mountains, the people who don't like this genocidal government live in the mountains, so that means the Mayans are secretly communist sympathizers who must be exterminated. The worst of this genocide came during the rule of Efrain Rios Montt, a dictator trained by the United States in torture and assassination at the Department of Defense-run School of the Americas. By the way, the United States runs a school where we train people from Latin America to torture civilians. Their list of alumni is disgusting. Rios Montt launched a scorched earth campaign against the Maya people, going from village to village and indiscriminately murdering civilians. Throughout this genocide, the Guatemalan military received millions in aid from the United States. Reagan said the following about Rios Montt. President Rios Montt is a man of great personal integrity and commitment. I know he wants to improve the quality of life of all Guatemalans and promote social justice. You know, the more I learn about Reagan, the more I wish Hinckley had a better aim. In total, 200,000 Mayan civilians were killed by the Guatemalan government. All this over fucking bananas! And while we're talking about fruit, how about the banana wars? You know, the multiple wars the United States waged specifically to protect the profits of banana companies? Like, God, the problem with talking about American atrocities is that there literally is not enough time to cover them all. For more than a century, the United States has treated Latin America as nothing more than a big pile of resources to extract. Rights of the citizens of those countries be damned. And that isn't freedom. And shit, how democratic is the United States even? When this film came out, it was ruled by a man who had gotten less votes in the election, who was placed in power through widespread political corruption. Like, that's a thing we don't talk about enough. That the governor of Florida, brother to a presidential candidate, threw out thousands of legal votes, a disproportionate amount of them belonging to black people, changing the results of an election. The troops sure did a good job protecting our rights back then! And it's always felt weird to me that Americans brag about the US being the freest country in the world when it has the highest incarceration rate in the world, in a large part due to policies created by Nixon as an excuse to arrest people for not voting for him. It's just ridiculous. When American nationalists talk about freedom, they don't mean it in any way that any dictionary would use. They don't mean democracy or civil rights or a lack of tyranny. They mean capitalism. The US government has fiercely redefined freedom to mean unfettered capitalism. Hell, they sometimes even use democracy as a synonym for capitalism. And the thing is, capitalism isn't freedom. And there are a lot of arguments I could make about why capitalism is antithetical to freedom. I could point out that capitalism is inherently a system where others have power over you, regardless of whether you want that or not. I could argue that workplaces are not democratic, that capitalism is centered on creating a bunch of tiny dictatorships that control everything. I could point out that work or starve is not a real choice. But there's a better argument against capitalism as freedom that I've already made. Look at Latin America. Look at the tyranny capitalists needed to prop up their system. Look at the hundreds of thousands of murders. Look at the people arrested for their political beliefs. The United States' policy during the Cold War was that capitalism was so great that it must be preserved at any cost. If the people don't want capitalist rule, then the people don't get to have any say in their government. If they have ideas other than those approved by a hostile foreign power, then they must be imprisoned. They must have their freedom stripped away so that freedom may ring on. And I want to get back to World War II, to the ground on which American interventionism is built. The United States should be the world's police, should invade countries around the world and decide who leads them, because Americans stopped the Nazis. But I wonder, would the American military from the height of the Cold War have stood against the Nazis? Cold War-era American leaders loved genocidal fascist dictators as long as they killed communists. I mean, after all, Patton famously said, and admittedly this is a bit apocryphal, but Patton said after World War II that we had fought the wrong enemy. If World War II had happened in the 60s, and Hitler had not invaded American allies, like, if all Hitler had done was kill Jewish people and invade Russia, I think that Nixon would have supported him. Because it isn't about freedom. It's about protecting capitalism through any means necessary. What was I talking about? Right! Team America World Police. Yeah, the idea that the US military keeps us or really anyone free is fundamentally ridiculous. Anyway, Gary decides to join Team America because freedom isn't free or whatever. The film then cuts to North Korea, specifically Pyongyang, although they just call it North Korea because this film is geographically challenged. Also, that isn't what frickin' Pyongyang looks like. What's with all the mountains? And where are all the buildings? For context, this is what Pyongyang actually looks like. Like, it's a modern city of 3 million people. And I know that this is a minor gripe, but it ties into one of the big problems I have with this film. It treats the people of countries the US is at war with as spooky monsters who we need to fear. And the way this film is shot ties into that. And I mean, media affects people. It affects how we see the world. It's a lot easier to be okay with nuking this than it is to be okay with nuking this. A Chechnyan terrorist with a big poofy hat travels to North Korea to meet with then-dictator Kim Jong-il, who kills his translator as a show of force. It is explained that Kim Jong-il has been supplying terrorists around the globe with weapons of mass destruction. And again, what? That's not a thing! First off, when this film came out, Chechnyan separatists were at war with Russia, a longtime ally of North Korea. Why would Kim Jong-il be giving nukes to people committing terrorism exclusively in one of the only countries that can stand him? Like, this is the way these nationalists see the world. That there's this vast conspiracy of everyone they don't like. The Muslims are working with the Russians, who are working with the people who are at war with Russia, who are working with the Koreans, who are working with liberal actors, who are working with blah, blah, blah. And it just keeps going on and on forever. But no, that isn't how the world works. The world is complicated. But you can't simplify the world down into this black and white good people versus evil people story if you acknowledge that complexity. Secondly, why would the North Korean government be shipping nukes to unrelated terrorist groups? Not only would that result in them being killed immediately, but it doesn't advance their goals. I'm repeating myself, but Kim Jong-il didn't want to destroy France. He wanted to hold on to power. And North Korea hasn't used any of their nukes against other countries yet because the main use of weapons of mass destruction is as an intimidation tactic. Don't invade North Korea because if you do, they'll hit Seoul with a nuclear missile. And that's horrible, but it's also antithetical to giving nukes to random Chechnyan terrorists. You can't use your nuclear missiles as a defensive threat if you get rid of all of them in an attempt to make every single country in the world want to invade you. And finally, North Korea didn't have nukes at the time. They first developed nuclear weapons in 2006. And that's a minor nitpick. It was clear in 2004 that they were working towards developing nukes, but still. Although, to be fair, I get it. It is scary when a country with a long history of human rights abuses owns nukes. Like, could you imagine how terrifying it would be if there was some far-off country ruled by an authoritarian who the people didn't vote for, who kept threatening to nuke your country? Like, imagine if that guy had, I don't know, 5,428 nuclear missiles? That would be scary. Also, it should be noted that the main joke with Kim Jong-il is that he mispronounces his L's and R's. Such brilliant political commentary. Truly, this film is the only one with the balls to put its foot down and shout to the heavens, "People who do not speak English as their first language often have accents!" I mean, seriously, what the fuck is this breakfast at Tiffany's bullshit? Like, yeah, it's racist, but it's also a racist joke recycled from the 1920s. Like, goddamn, that's the bar you're going for? Stealing jokes from your grandparents? So anyway, Team America finds out that there's a big meeting of terrorists in Cairo. The team's plan is to have Gary, an actor, infiltrate the terrorist meeting and find out information on the next big attack. Unfortunately, Gary's white. Oops! Guess they didn't think to hire a Middle Eastern actor, cause there's none in the United States. But don't worry, the team has a plan to help Gary go undercover. And that plan is, oh fuck me, no!
I'm so lonely, so lonely, so lonely inside real alone.
I'm gonna ignore the blackface because if I focused on it, I would destroy my throat from shouting too much. The team flies off to Cairo as the film's main theme plays. America, fuck yeah, coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah. And this is a good moment to bring up the question that defines this essay. How seriously should I take this? Like, the song is clearly joking. The great American triumphs it brags about include McDonald's, Walmart, and slavery. But at the same time, the whole terrorist your game is through because now you have to answer to America is more genuine, I would argue. This song is from a film that exists to justify the actions of the American military on the grounds that they fight terrorists. Like, Freedom Isn't Free is joking when it says freedom costs $1.05, but still, it is true that freedom isn't free, at least according to this film's plot and themes. It is possible for this film's creators to both make fun of America and still, at the end of the day, think, yeah, America, fuck yeah. What parts to take seriously and what parts to ignore as jokes is a tough question. Most people tend to brush off the entire film as a big joke, and that is a mistake, I feel. The film's ending speech is genuine, and from interviews with this film's writers, we know that they agree with this film's thesis. So bear with me as I take this film way more seriously than it deserves, because few people have taken it seriously at all. It's important that at least someone takes a critical look at what these guys say. Anyway, the team arrives in Cairo, and if we're being technical, that is not Cairo, that is Giza. I mean, I'm being pedantic, they're not far, but still, it's like the main characters getting off a plane in Newark and saying, I love New York City. What does deserve critique is how Cairo looks. The set design in this film is excellent, how all of the puppeteering is, but it doesn't remove the fact that that is not what Cairo looks like. This is what Cairo looks like. Like it's a modern city twice the size of New York. They have buildings taller than 2 stories and have paved roads. They have electricity. What this film shows is the stereotypical Middle Eastern bazaar that's been appearing in movies for 80 years. And I really hate that trope. Like, movies shape how we see the world. This is how a lot of Americans think of the world thanks to decades of movies like this. They see the Middle East as a desolate desert filled with uncivilized savages. They never think to consider the idea that the capital of Egypt would be, a city, because they already think so lowly of the people living in countries like Egypt. And it's racist, but more than that, it's dehumanizing. And I know this doesn't seem like a big deal, but it ties into my problems with this film. It's a symptom of a much bigger issue. This film's utter contempt for Muslims. Now, there is an argument to be made that this is intentionally bad. After all, this movie is parodying action movies and American attitudes. It's showing Cairo in a ridiculous, racist way to make fun of American racists who think like that. And that could be true, but I don't think so. The depiction of Muslims throughout this film makes me think that the film's writers are racist and genuinely think that Pyongyang and Cairo look the way they look in this film. The team lands in Cairo, crushing a merchant cart with a massive helicopter that says, "We protect, we serve, we care." And in a better film, that would be a cutting critique of the actions of its villain protagonists. But this is not that film. Put a pin in that moment, it will be important later. Gary walks into the cantina from Star Wars and, oh god, the dialogue. The fucking dialogue. Muslims in this movie do not speak Arabic. They speak a gibberish language of nonsense words with occasional real words like jihad or Muhammad thrown in. And it goes back to that pattern of dehumanization. Muslims aren't really people in this movie. They're spooky, scary monsters who say nonsense words and are evil because they're evil. And yes, I know that the film is a parody. I know the damn film is a comedy. But all movie, even parodies, even comedies, can shape how we see the world. I have seen people mock Muslims using this film's gibberish, because this film shaped how they see the 2 billion Muslims around the world. And contributing to that dehumanization when millions of Americans are in this racist, nationalistic fervor and biting at the bit to murder Muslims it's fucking horrible. This film came out a few years after 9/11, in the same era where hate crimes against Muslims increased tenfold. And this film doesn't mock the racism or cruelty of bigoted Americans. It embraces it. It treats their hatred as factual. It portrays Muslims as monsters. It portrays the Iraq War not as a complicated civil war between factions allied with the US and factions opposing us, with millions of civilians tragically caught in the crossfire, but instead as a glorious crusade against the godless heathens living in huts that must be exterminated for the good of the white race. And yeah, that's really fucking racist. While he's in the cantina, Gary runs into two men who describe themselves, I quote, as Bashir rebels from Somalia. On one of the rewatches of this film I did for this essay, that line confused me. I wasn't sure what they were talking about, so I looked it up. And that only made me more confused. The only things that came up when I googled the term Bashir rebels from Somalia were this movie, a 3-sentence long Wikipedia article on a Somali guy who's part of an American counterterrorism organization, and a small Somali rebellion against the British Empire in 1945. So, I was left befuddled. What the fuck was this film even talking about? Did it make up a group of Somali terrorists? No, I actually figured it out eventually. These men are intended to be working for Omar al-Bashir, the then president of Sudan. Now, in case this is not clear, Somalia is not Sudan. Somalia is more than 1,000 miles away from Sudan. Also, if they're working for the government, then they aren't really rebels. And I know it's not a film you're meant to take seriously, but is this a joke? If so, I can't imagine anyone has ever got it. For it to be a joke, it requires the audience to know enough about both Sudanese and Somali politics to understand what they're saying is incorrect, and also to laugh at it for some reason. Personally, I think it's just a good example of the fact that this film's writers don't know what the fuck they're talking about. To be fair, Omar al-Bashir is definitely a monster. The man committed genocide in Darfur. Never in this video will I ever say that a leader is good just because they oppose the US. That's some fucking tanky bullshit. But, I mean, he is a good example of how this film sees the world exclusively through an American lens. The Bashir rebels in this film are not evil because they murdered 300,000 people in Sudan. The film never even mentions that. They're evil because they want to destroy America. And I mean, this guy was only overthrown in 2019, and America's still standing, so that doesn't seem to have been a realistic concern. Gary is taken back to talk with the Chechnyan, who says that he wants to put out a war on the infidels because they destroyed our lives, asking Gary, what do you know about pain and sadness? Gary, being an actor, manages to improv a decent answer. I was just a boy when the infidels came to my village with their Black Hawk helicopters. The infidels fired at the oil fields and they lit up like the eyes of Allah. Burning oil rained down from the sky and cooked everything it touched. Then he talks about fucking goats because this film is really fucking racist. But still, this is a really big improvement over that earlier scene where Spotsworth says that terrorists want to kill Gary because he stands for freedom. It begins to acknowledge that terrorists don't commit atrocities because they're spooky evil brown people who are evil because they're spooky evil brown people. It begins to acknowledge that terrorists have motives. And those motives are often twisted and morally reprehensible. But still, terrorists have goals. They have things they want to accomplish and reasons they want to see those goals completed. And I think that if you want to defeat terrorism, you can't just treat terrorists as cartoon monsters who eat babies for fun. If you want to defeat terrorism, you need to understand it. This leads me to a fun segment I like to call, Why Did 9/11 Happen? According to Bush, it happened because terrorists hated our freedom. And, in case you somehow haven't gotten the memo, Bush was a lying cunt. No, 9/11 didn't happen because Osama bin Laden was a mustache-twirling villain who hated America for being awesome. And also a guy who wasn't democratically elected claiming the terrorists hate us because we have democratically elected leaders is so fucking stupid, it pisses me off. We actually have a pretty good idea as to bin Laden's motives because he wrote out multiple manifestos, and none of them say, "I hate America because of their freedom." That isn't to say his motives were good, they're a mismatch of genuine ideals and horrible bullshit. But again, understanding why men like bin Laden do what they do is important. There were 5 major motives for the September 11th terrorist attacks. First off, bin Laden hated Israel and the United States for its steadfast support of Israel. And I mean, there are legitimate criticisms of the Israeli government to be made. For example, during the Lebanon War, the Israeli Air Force destroyed high-rise buildings in Beirut, killing 300 people and giving bin Laden the idea to target the World Trade Center. But bin Laden's manifestos aren't really nuanced criticism. Like, he hated Israel for being a country filled with Jewish people just as much as he did for being a violent apartheid state. Any legitimate grievances are lost in the bigotry. Secondly, bin Laden was angry over Americans giving support to governments that killed Muslim civilians around the world. Fair enough. Third, he was angry over 5,000 American troops being stationed in Saudi Arabia near the holy site of Mecca. And that's a valid complaint given the last point, but not to the point of justifying murder. Bin Laden also hated America for not rejecting the immoral acts of fornication, homosexuality, intoxicants, gambling, and trading with interest. Yikes, that's a pretty shitty motive. You know, it's a shame bin Laden attacked American civilians. If he hadn't, he and the religious right would have had a great time talking about their mutual hatred of gay people. And I mean, this does tie into the fact that Osama bin Laden was a religious extremist. Religious extremists are very, very, very dangerous and capable of incredible acts of violence. On an unrelated note, did you know that Bush thought the invasion of Iraq was a fulfillment of a biblical prophecy that would cause the apocalypse? And before I state this next motive, I want to make something very clear so you fuckers don't misquote me. Osama bin Laden was an evil bastard, and no atrocity by the United States could ever justify his actions. Like, the whole point of this video is that indiscriminate slaughter of civilians is the most evil thing you can do. But a thing we must acknowledge when we talk about 9/11 is that one of the primary motives for the attack was the 1990 sanctions levied against Iraq following the invasion of Kuwait. These sanctions kept Iraq from trading with the rest of the world, devastating the country's economy. They also prevented the import of food and medicine for 7 years, and even then only in limited amounts. Allegedly, these sanctions led to massive increases in malnutrition and deaths from preventable diseases. According to a 1995 study by Lancet and a 1999 study by UNICEF, these sanctions led to the deaths of 500,000 children. The idea of the United States killing 500,000 children is enough to make any person with a heart absolutely furious. And the reaction by the United States was monstrous. In an interview with 60 Minutes, Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, was asked if the deaths of 500,000 children was something the United States was okay with. Her response? "I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it." Absolutely disgusting. So, yeah, that's a big part of why bin Laden hated us. And also the anti-Semitism and the homophobia, and I mean, anything he said should obviously be taken with a grain of salt, but the fact remains that 9/11 happened because this man blamed the United States for murdering 500,000 children in cold blood. And we ignored it! Our leaders said they hated us for our freedom and never for a second stopped and considered that maybe people hate us because we murder children. Like, we were told 9/11 happened because of, to quote the man responsible, the greatest mass slaughter of children mankind has ever known, and our response was to invade a random country whose people had nothing to do with the attack and murder more children. Osama bin Laden brutally slayed 3,000 innocent people because he believed in an eye for an eye, and our response was to retaliate by stabbing random people in the eyes. We chose to continue the cycle of revenge, and the deaths kept piling up. Now, it should be noted that the death count of 500,000 is heavily disputed, and it seems to have been inflated by the government of Iraq. Much like the invasion of Iraq, the 9/11 terrorist attacks were motivated by a lie. But evidence that the sanctioned death toll was exaggerated did not come out until years after 9/11, and by then it was too late. And it isn't ridiculous to have believed that death toll back in 2001. There is a long history of sanctions causing famines. Iraq was only able to escape from these famines by massively reshaping its agricultural industry. And it's not like the United States denied the allegations. Madeleine Albright, back when the only studies available said that the sanctions murdered 500,000 children, said, "Yeah, we murdered those kids. We feel no guilt. We'll do it again. We will do it again unless we're stopped." I also do question modern studies that argue that there was literally no change in child mortality. Like, maybe it was not as severe as Hussein claimed, but the idea that collapsing Iraq's economy and keeping them from importing medicine didn't kill anyone seems far-fetched. The US wouldn't use sanctions as a weapon if they did nothing. Another part of bin Laden's ideology that needs to be remembered is that he thought the US was a paper tiger. Like, he thought that if Americans suffered, they would leave the Middle East. And that was a dumb thing to think. 9/11 caused Americans to increase their presence in the Middle East 100-fold. But bin Laden believed himself to be moral. He believed that he was doing the right thing, that killing 3,000 Americans to stop Americans from killing more people in the Islamic world was acceptable. And, to be honest, how is that any different from nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki to stop the Japanese military from killing people in China and Korea? You know, minute for minute, this video is probably going to be more about things other than Team America World Police than it is about Team America World Police. It's also probably going to end up being longer than that entire movie. Editing this is gonna suck, isn't it? Anyway, Team America is spotted by the Chechenian, leading to a big action scene. During this action scene, the team blows up one of the pyramids of Giza, raining burning rubble down on civilians. They also destroy the Sphinx and one of the Abu Simbel temples. Wait, Abu Simbel? That's 500 miles away! This film's geography is terrible! Also, you know, destroying important cultural artifacts is a bit of a dick move, Team America. Much like Paris before it, Cairo is left in rubble by Team America. Now, this is about a third of the way through the film. On a first viewing, this is where you would expect the deconstruction to happen. Like, so far, the film has shown its stand-in for the US military to be a violent, racist, destructive group who kill more people than the terrorists they claim to fight. Like, this movie has already done the "we did it, Patrick, we saved the city" thing twice. I feel like, narratively, this is the moment when things change, where the protagonists are forced to grapple with the fact that they are not good people, that their recklessness and callous disregard for human life is monstrous. This is the part where they are forced to acknowledge that indiscriminate slaughter just makes people hate the US. Like, if this film was a satire of American militarism, then this is the part where you show that to be horrible. And the film has done a decent job building up to that moment. Like, remember them landing a helicopter on that cart? This film, you'd expect, would start criticizing its heroes at this point. And it doesn't. It never does that. It never portrays Team America as the villain. It shows them doing evil things, sure, but it's always treated as a necessary evil. The film never argues that Team America should change, that they need to be better. Rather, the rest of the film is dedicated to A, mocking their critics for daring to have a problem with Team America 9/11ing the Louvre, and B, exaggerating the strength of foreign threats to argue that yes, this is necessary. Team America World Police is a very interesting piece of propaganda, and I will stand by the claim that it is a piece of propaganda. A lot of older pieces of propaganda made to serve the US military shied away from the horrors. Like, Top Gun doesn't feature a scene where Tom Cruise blows up a hospital because that would undercut the film's core message of "Join the Navy, join the Navy, join the Navy, join the Navy." But a lot of films about the US military made after the War on Terror began instead show the horrors. American Sniper features a scene where Chris Kyle kills a child. Zero Dark 30 acknowledges the fact that the US government imprisons people without trial and tortures them. This film, which was ahead of the curve, portrays the military stand-in as a bunch of idiots who blow up buildings and don't give a shit. But the way these modern propaganda pieces cleverly shut down any deep discussion into the actions of their protagonists is by making sure to show their actions as justified. Chris Kyle kills a kid, yeah, but the child is a suicide bomber who would have killed his friends, and he is haunted by it afterward. The CIA brutally tortures prisoners, but doing so catches Bin Laden. Team America blows up the Louvre, but in doing so they stop a WMD from destroying all of Paris. And it has to be noted that these portrayals of real events are bullshit. We've already talked about how dumb the suitcase nuke thing is, and of course the torture in Guantanamo Bay didn't result in the capture of Bin Laden. It didn't result in any useful information. It was a pointless act of cruelty against men who could very well be innocent, given the fact that they haven't received trials and are held on the grounds of "trust us, bro," by a violent government known for lying. In real life, the scene of Chris Kyle killing a child never happened. It was made up for the movie. He did kill the mother, though, and wrote that he felt no remorse because she was one of those savages. Obligatory Chris Kyle was a bastard mention. People aren't dumb. They know the US military constantly kills civilians. So you can't just ignore the war crimes in your movies. Instead, you rewrite history to make them justified. You add a scene of your American sniper feeling remorse. And it works. Look at this fucked up Quora response that was the first result when I googled that American sniper scene. This is what they want you to think. They know you know about the US military killing children, so they instead try to convince you that everyone killed by the US military had it coming. And in case it wasn't obvious, a vast majority of the civilians killed by the US military aren't 8-year-old suicide bombers. And also that isn't the etymology for infantry. Like, infant and infantry are both derived from a root word meaning young, but that doesn't mean that historically infantry was composed of small children. What the fuck? But while we're justifying atrocities committed during the War on Terror, here are a few more war crimes that hopefully Hollywood can come up with good ways to justify in their next big propaganda film. March 2006, Iraq. A group of American soldiers gang-raped 14-year-old Abir Qasim Hamza al-Janabi before murdering her 6-year-old sister, and her parents. When interviewed by the Washington Post, perpetrator Stephen Dale Green said, "I came over here because I wanted to kill people. The truth is, it wasn't all I thought it was cracked up to be. I mean, I thought killing someone would be this life-changing experience. And then I did it, and I was like, alright, whatever. I shot a guy who wouldn't stop when we were out at a traffic checkpoint, and it was like nothing. Over here, killing people is like squashing an ant. I mean, you kill somebody, and it's like, alright, let's go get some pizza." September 2007, Iraq. After hearing a car bomb go off, Blackwater mercenaries working for the US government opened fire on civilians, killing 17 bystanders. 4 of the shooters were ultimately found guilty of murder. In 2020, Donald Trump gave each of them a full pardon. July 2008, Afghanistan. American aircraft mistakenly dropped bombs on a wedding party in Haska, Maina, killing 47 different people, 39 of them women or children. August 2008, Afghanistan. The United States destroyed houses in Azizabad with airstrikes, killing approximately 90 people. November 2008, Afghanistan. Again, the United States accidentally bombed a wedding, this time killing 37 people, 23 of them children, in the village of Wekbagtu. January 2009, Afghanistan. A group of American soldiers brutally murdered 15-year-old Gul Muddin, acting under orders of Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs. The soldiers stripped the boy naked and posed for photos with his corpse. No, I'm not going to show them. Gibbs cut off the boy's finger and kept it as a trophy. In the following months, Gibbs and his men committed at least 3 other murders, each time taking body parts as trophies. May 2009, Afghanistan. The United States called in an airstrike in the village of Granai, killing 140 civilians, 93 of them children. The United States claims to have only killed 20 to 30 civilians, but refuses to release footage of the attack. November 2009, Iraq. After driving over an IED, a squad of Marines decide to kill everyone in the surrounding area, ripping civilians out of cars and executing them in the street. They then moved from house to house, firing at everyone inside. 24 people were slain. Victims included 4-year-old Abdullah Walid, 8-year-old Muhammad Yunus Salim, 14-year-old Noor Yunus Salim, 10-year-old Saba Yunus Salim, 3-year-old Aisha Yunus Salim, and an unnamed 1-year-old girl staying with one of the families. After the massacre, Staff Sergeant Frank Wutrick pissed in the skull of one of his victims. Not a single Marine involved served any time in prison. February 2010, Afghanistan. The United States destroyed 3 buses full of civilians with helicopters, killing 27 people. March 2012, Afghanistan. Army sniper Robert Bales got drunk and decided to avenge fallen friends by mass murdering civilians. Bales murdered 16 people in the village of Al-Qazai, injuring an additional 6. 9 of his victims were children. Barack Obama responded by saying that it was heartbreaking, but he was generally proud of what American troops had done in Afghanistan. October 2015, Afghanistan. The U.S. Air Force mistakenly destroyed a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, killing at least 42 people. The Pentagon refused to charge anyone because it was an accident and manslaughter is apparently not a crime. The Obama administration offered a measly $6,000 each to the families of the deceased. They don't hate us for our freedom. They hate us because we keep killing them. And until we understand that, they will never stop hating us. Exact death tolls for Iraq and Afghanistan are hard to determine. Estimates range wildly, but at a certain point the exact death number doesn't matter. Any of these atrocities would be unacceptable. And all of them together is an evil I cannot properly describe. And killing all these civilians, these acts that can only be described as terrorism, they didn't kill terrorism. They made more people hate us. They created ISIS, and we responded to ISIS by murdering more civilians. We kept the cycle going. And for what? So some oil companies could make some money? So Bush could live out his apocalypse fantasies? So violent, racist Americans could rape and kill those terrible children of monsters in the Middle East like they'd always wanted to? But hey, you gotta remember, when the military kills civilians, it's fine, because they keep us safe. They fight for our freedom. Back to the film. The team returns to Cairo only to discover that there are Americans who have a problem with their indiscriminate slaughter. And these people are actors.
Everyone has ace. Ace, ace, ace. Ace, 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 ace.
Team America is attacked in the press by a group of celebrities the writers didn't like called the Film Actors Guild. Get it? It's like the Screen Actors Guild, except it's a slur. God, the early 2000s were fucking awful. This group, led by Alec Baldwin, is angered by the reckless violence caused by Team America in Cairo. But not Paris for some reason? Did this film forget about the main characters doing a 9/11? One by one, the actors speak out about their issues with the team. Baldwin says that the world needs compassion, not violence, and that Team America just creates new enemies. And yeah, that's true. Mass murdering civilians abroad makes people dislike the United States. I just got done explaining that. Tim Robbins explains that the massive corporations that fund Team America are bad. And yeah, the military-industrial complex is bad. It's bad that the people who profit off human suffering use their money and influence to push the United States into needless wars to make a quick buck. And also, corporations in general are kind of shitty. Sean Penn says that he went to Iraq and that it was beautiful before Team America showed up. And again, he's right. I mean, there were already problems in Iraq due to the country having just gone out of another lengthy war, but it's undeniable that parts of the country were destroyed by the American military. This is a type of political criticism that I see sometimes that is just awful. Where instead of making any sort of argument against a point, you just repeat it in a stupid voice and assume you've won. It's so fucking stupid. It's the lowest form of criticism. Like, the military-industrial complex is bad. The military-industrial complex is bad. It's this stupid, lazy political criticism that makes me hate South Park. Or at least the 5 or so episodes that I've seen. This is a film whose main form of humor is, lol, the puppet keeps vomiting. It cannot have deep arguments because that would ruin the joke. And instead of cutting the political commentary, they just dumb it down to fit the style of the film. And also, this is what you thought was important to criticize? Actors? Yeah, sure, that's at the top of the list of people who have political power. George Bush, nah, no reason to mock him, everyone's doing that. Let's take potshots at George Clooney. And, in case it wasn't clear, the reason that George Bush got more criticism is because he was the commander-in-chief of a nuclear superpower, while George Clooney was in Batman and Robin. Like, yeah, celebrities are annoying, but also that's such a minor point when compared to the other issues this film deals with. It is ridiculous to put the issues of civilian casualties during the War on Terror on the same scale as an actor said he didn't like the war and was kind of annoying. This angry, fuck you if you don't support the troops, ranting at people who dare to criticize the US government doesn't really sit right with me. Like, in many ways, this film's hatred of actors seems to also be aimed at anyone who has a problem with the War on Terror. Baldwin and his gang are the only characters in this film who dare to question Team America's supremacy or call them out for their acts of terror. This is a film that is furious at the idea that someone could possibly have a problem with the US military. It's also kinda disturbing that the stand-in for critics of the US military ends up joining up with Kim Jong-il later in the film. Like, this film sees the world in black and white. Either you're for the war or you're an enemy. Either you accept every single murdered civilian as necessary, or you're a terrorist sympathizer who deserves to die. I also don't feel that the argument Hollywood hates the troops is true. If anything, Hollywood likes the US military too much. I made a whole video essay last year about how the US military has an incredible amount of influence over Hollywood and uses that influence to demand that any scripts critical of them are rewritten. American Sniper and Zero Dark 30, the pair of pro-war and terror propaganda films I mentioned earlier, were both nominated for multiple Oscars. At the 2003 Oscars, Michael Moore, one of this film's main targets, attempted to criticize the invasion of Iraq. He was booed off stage and cut off before he could finish his speech. If actors hated the war on terror so much, why did they censor a man for criticizing it? And here's my big problem with the Film Actors Guild. This film's creators didn't want people in the entertainment industry to lecture them on politics. Fine. But the thing is, they're a part of the entertainment industry. Parker and Stone are actors. They spent their entire lives in the entertainment industry. They've won Emmys. South Park is distributed by the same company as the Transformer movies and SpongeBob SquarePants. This was years after this film, admittedly, but Trey Parker was in a goddamn Minions movie. This is a movie made by actors in which they preach about what political opinions you should have. South Park is a show by actors in which they preach about politics. And this film is every bit as self-righteous and arrogant as anything Sean Penn or Alec Baldwin has ever said. And they say in that Salon interview that they don't want to be like the actors they hate and say this is how it should be. Then don't make the fucking movie. Don't end every episode of your cartoon with a lecture to the camera about politics. You don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to both make preachy bullshit and also think you're better than other people who make preachy bullshit. I'd also like to note that the actors mocked in this film, for the most part, loved it. Alec Baldwin adored the film and called it hysterical, never mentioning any of the political arguments it made. George Clooney said he would have been insulted to not be included. Matt Damon said, "I think that they are absolute geniuses, and what they've done is awesome, and I'm a big fan of theirs." Although, he did admit to not really getting the Matt Damon joke. Only one actor featured had any problem with the film, and that was Sean Penn, who sent Parker and Stone an angry letter saying, "I never mind being of service in satire and silliness. You guys are talented young guys. It's all well to joke about me or whomever you choose." Oh, right. I forgot that people mischaracterized Sean Penn's problems with the movie. He wasn't mad that they mocked him. He took issue with Parker and Stone saying the people who don't know about politics shouldn't vote, instead of encouraging them to become knowledgeable about politics, because the actions of the US government often decide who lives and who dies abroad, which is a fair criticism. The entire letter is on screen now, and it is very clear that that fuck you is meant as a joke. The film cuts to a scene in North Korea where Kim Jong-il meets with Hans Blix. And you're probably asking yourself, who is Hans Blix? Hans Blix, dear viewers, was the executive chairman of the United Nations Monitoring, Verification, and Inspection Commission from 2000 to 2003. Hans Blix was the man sent by the UN to search Iraq for weapons of mass destruction. Blix conducted 700 different inspections and never found a single WMD. In this film, he is portrayed as being an incompetent idiot who Kim walks all over before feeding to a shark. The appearance of Hans Blix takes away one of the excuses this film's writers had. A lot of Americans deceived by the White House into supporting the Iraq War have the excuse that they had no reason to doubt the federal government's claims. The average person genuinely thought Saddam Hussein had nukes. But this film's writers, Parker Stone and Brady, they knew that claim was dubious. They knew the UN extensively searched Iraq and found nothing. And their response was not to question the state, to assume a politician might have an ulterior motive for starting a war. Their response was to put their fingers in their ears and go, la 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 la, I can't hear you! Pam Brady said that the Film Actors Guild exists because she was tired of having to listen to Hollywood celebrities instead of experts, and that's valid. But Hans Blix was an expert. You were given policy information from a decorated diplomat who traveled to the country in question, and you ignored it. You got so mad at the idea of listening to an expert that you added a scene where he gets eaten by a shark. We're tired of people listening to the experts. They need to listen to people who actually understand global politics. South Park writers! While we're talking about Kim Jong-il, can I point out that this film does not actually feature Kim Jong-il? It features a Bond villain named Kim Jong-il. Nothing about this film is really about the guy it's mocking. Like, 90% of the mockery he receives is for being Asian. Like, that's the film's real problem with the guy. That he was from a different country, and that was bad, I guess. And the other 10% of his screen time is just generic supervillain stuff. And that is honestly a bit of a missed opportunity, because there is a wealth of comedy material to be found in the actual Kim Jong-il. Because Kim Jong-il was a fucking loser. His father, Kim Il-sung, he was popular. He was a guerrilla fighter who founded the country and led it through decades of prosperity. He was able to build his cult of personality in a large part because he was genuinely liked. But then he died and his loser son was put in charge. This man who almost never spoke in public because he was afraid of public speaking. This man who rode around in a bulletproof train because he was afraid of flying. He was a James Bond fanboy obsessed with Sean Connery. He claimed to be the greatest golfer who ever lived. And you know, I think that's interesting. This dumbass who is only popular because he executes anyone who doesn't tell him he's cool. What we instead get is this intimidating, dangerous villain. And that kind of helps his public image, portraying him as far more competent and scary than he actually was. This film treats Kim Jong-il with more respect than he ever deserved. And it is not my intention to downplay the evil of Kim Jong-il. He was horrible, as was his father and as is his son. But he was not horrible because he was this chess master controlling all of the world's terrorists. He was evil because he killed Korean civilians. But this film doesn't seem to care at all about Kim Jong-il's victims. This film never mentions the atrocities against people he ruled over. All it mentions is that he hated America. And I want to talk about that hatred of America. Hatred that stems in a large part from the Korean War. I was originally going to do this during the Freedom Isn't Free rant, but I think it works better here. The United States got involved in the Korean War in part to defend an ally, but in a much larger part out of a desire to stomp out communism. The Korean War was in many ways a proxy war with the USSR. It was not a battle between communism and democracy, as the US likes to claim, nor was it a battle for freedom. Because, and this is a fact that is brought up very rarely for obvious reasons, at the time South Korea was a brutal dictatorship. South Korea was ruled over by Syngman Rhee, a man who regularly arrested or executed political opponents, held sham elections, and massacred 100,000 of his own people for their political beliefs. The Kim family were, and still are, awful, but the Korean War was not a battle between freedom and tyranny. It was a battle between two tyrants duking it out for complete control over the peninsula. The United States only got involved in the war because they liked one of the dictators more. And the things we did in the Korean War don't get talked about enough. The United States military carried out a massive, brutal bombing campaign that destroyed every single town in the country. By the end of the war, American soldiers were forced to dump bombs into the ocean on bombing runs because there simply wasn't anything left to destroy. Estimates of the civilian casualties range from 1.2 million to as high as 3 million. American planes bombed dams and flooded farmland to create a famine that, if not for aid from China and the USSR, would have resulted in millions more dying of starvation. To quote Air Force General Curtis LeMay, We went over there and fought the war and eventually burned down every town in North Korea anyway, some way or another, and some in South Korea too. Over a period of 3 years or so, we killed off, 20% of the population of Korea as direct casualties of war or from starvation and exposure. And it could have been so much worse. General Douglas MacArthur wanted to drop 50 nukes on North Korea. Earlier, I said the idea that there are terrorists out there with nukes was ridiculous. And in hindsight, that is less than true. Because after all, what other description fits MacArthur? I mean, to be fair, he's dead now, but there are other people who believe the same bullshit. Now, to be fair, Kim Il-sung started the war by invading South Korea. But so what? The civilians slaughtered by American bombs didn't start the war. They weren't in charge. Why did they deserve to die because of the crimes of their government? Like, myself and most of my viewers are Americans. We sure as hell don't want to live in a world where it is moral to kill civilians over the actions of their governments, because in that world, all of us would be dead. And if the goal of the Korean War actually was to bring democracy to North Korea, then it failed spectacularly. Not just because it ended in a stalemate, but because the atrocities only strengthened the grip of the Kim regime. Americans are constantly confused at how people could live under a military dictatorship like that of North Korea and not rebel. But part of the reason the Kim family has managed to stay in power for so long is because the people of North Korea are fucking terrified of the American military. And they should be! We have nukes! We murdered their families! They did nothing to us and we invaded and murdered their families. And we're shocked that they're afraid of us. And sure, it was 70 years ago, except hold on! 5 years ago, the sitting US president threatened to destroy North Korea again. The Kim family uses the atrocities carried out by the American military as a centerpiece in their propaganda. They tell their people, give us power, give us everything, and we will keep you safe. We will make the military strong, we'll develop nukes, and then we'll be safe when the Americans come back for us. We all saw how much 9/11 fucked up the collective minds of Americans. Imagine if 9/11 happened again and again for 3 years. Imagine 1,000 different 9/11s in a row. Imagine how that would destroy how you saw the world. 9/11 was enough to make Americans accept the Patriot Act. Imagine what we would have gone along with if they brought down every building in the country. I'd like to address real quick a complaint I believe this video will get. That I spend far more time criticizing the United States than I do criticizing its enemies. And yeah, I do. My intention isn't to downplay any war crimes committed by anyone, but the crimes of Saddam Hussein and Kim Jong-il are far more known, at least to Americans, than those of MacArthur or Rios Montt. Most Americans don't learn anything if you tell them Kim Il-sung was a dictator. They do learn new information that is vital to understand the complexities of history when you tell them that Syngman Rhee was. The goal of this video is to give another perspective on the War on Terror and use that perspective to argue against this film's ideology. Anyway, back to the movie that is honestly just a framing point that I periodically cut back to at this point. Kim Jong-il gives a nuke to the generic Muslim terrorists, which they use to blow apart the water locks of the Panama Canal. And I know we just got done with a tangent, but I kinda want to start another one real quick. The United States actually owned the Panama Canal for most of its existence. In 1979, Jimmy Carter lobbied to eventually give it back to the people of Panama in 1999 and faced a massive backlash, barely managing to push the deal through the Senate. I'm not sure how widespread it was, but I found some articles from 1999 of people wringing their hands out about how the canal would be an easy target for terrorists, or worse, Chinese shipping companies. And that really goes to show how these people view the world. Other countries cannot be trusted to make their own decisions or own the land they live on, because only the United States can be trusted to do things right. If the United States isn't a colonial empire, then all of those poor countries would be eradicated. Which is why the United States must control everything, they state. Why we must be the world police and have bases in 80 different countries. Because us Americans are the only people competent enough to manage things. This film sees the return of the Panama Canal and says, well, that's gonna be destroyed because America doesn't own it anymore. It's spiteful at the very idea of a loss of American control. But looking back 23 years later, it's ridiculous. The Panama Canal is fine. Hell, it's been run even better by the Panamanians than it was by Americans. Tangent to the tangent, you can add Panama to the list of countries whose governments the US overthrew. In 1989, the United States overthrew Manuel Noriega, ruler of Panama. And this isn't quite as bad as the overthrows of Allende or Arbenz. I mean, Noriega was a corrupt dictator who was buddies with the CIA and helped with Iran-Contra, but still. Also, he was another School of America's graduate. Weird that so many dictators went there. The United States called this invasion Operation Just Cause, and that's dumb. You can't just call a morally shaky mission Operation Just Cause and then pretend it's a good thing to do because you called it Operation Just Cause. It's like how they named the invasion of Iraq Operation Iraqi Freedom and the invasion of Afghanistan Operation Enduring Freedom. Just shut the fuck up. Also, they overthrew him for smuggling drugs, which is ridiculous considering their support for the Contras at the same time. And it should be noted, people died when the United States invaded Panama. 3,000 Panamanian soldiers were killed. And, according to the Central American Human Rights Commission, so were 3,000 civilians. Team America hears about the attack on the canal and is horrified. It is at this point where we finally learn who those generic Muslim terrorists are. They are terrorists from Turkmenistan. Sure, goddammit, fine, whatever. If you're gonna treat the Middle East as a pit of violent, inhuman savages, you might as well name the country that stands in for all Muslims everywhere after your dumb racist joke. And this is how a lot of Americans at the time and still to this day saw Muslims. As this scary conglomerate that only exists for evil that needs to be destroyed. Not as different countries filled with different people, but as a single enemy. The idea of the Middle East being a diverse region with complicated geopolitics is too much for their dumbass racist brains to comprehend. The idea that Iraq and Iran are not only different countries, but that they had been at war with each other 15 years prior is not something these dumb fucks can understand. Because the people of these countries aren't people according to them. They're Muslims, and they don't think of Muslims as people. The Film Actors Guild blames Team America for the attack in Panama, saying it was retaliation for all the terrorism Team America did in Cairo. And again, they don't make any argument, they just have the characters say the beliefs they disagree with in a stupid voice. We should put some blame on the US military for the actions of the terrorists they radicalize. Not all of it, but definitely some. The constant killing of civilians in the Middle East played a large part in the formation of these terrorist groups. This film has a double standard about how justified retaliatory violence is. Like, the team flying off to kill terrorists in retaliation of the Panama bombing is fine and moral, but terrorists blowing up the canal in retaliation for Cairo is cruel and unjustifiable. And, of course, that is how American nationalists see everything. Putting sanctions on Iraq in retaliation for the invasion of Kuwait is good, even if innocent people die. But destroying the Twin Towers in retaliation for the sanctions is bad, because innocent people died. But invading Iraq in retaliation for 9/11 is good, even though innocent people died. It speaks to a larger worldview problem. For many Americans, the world is sorted into good people and bad people. These groups are not sorted by how moral their actions are. Rather, the morality of their actions is determined by whether or not the group they belong to is good. Team America killing people in Paris is acceptable, if not good, definitely acceptable, because they're fighting the bad guys. But the Turkestani terrorists killing people in Panama is bad, because they're killing people and killing people is always wrong. Al-Qaeda killing civilians as part of their war against the US is unforgivable, but the US killing civilians as part of their war against Al-Qaeda is acceptable losses. The price is worth it. Blowing up buildings isn't evil when the good guys do it. And I shouldn't need to explain why this myopic worldview is wrong. I shouldn't have to explain that morality is not defined by who you are. It's defined by what you do. And indiscriminate slaughter of civilians isn't acceptable just because you're the good guys. Gary is the only member of the team to have any self-reflection. Horrified both at the idea that he caused innocent people to die and that his hero Alec Baldwin hates him, Gary quits the team. Lisa tells him to stay because he's the only one with the power to help them. Gary angrily shouts, "I don't want the fucking power. I don't want the guilt. I don't want the shame. I don't want the responsibility." More on that later. The team flies off to Turkmenistan and engages with the terrorists, who have an air force now, I guess. The mission goes south when the North Korean Air Force shows up, having somehow flown across all of Asia without refueling or being seen by radar. I guess maybe they have planes stored in Durka. No, I'm sorry, I can't. I can't take this film seriously. I can't discuss the political implications of a film that calls a country Durka-Durkistan. Ugh. Fuck it. I've put in too much effort to stop now. The team is shot down and captured thanks to the combined might of North Korea and generic Muslim terrorists, and oh my god, it's the Axis of Evil. That just clicked. This film was inspired by the Axis of Evil speech. For context, the Axis of Evil speech was a 2002 State of the Union speech written by David Frum and delivered by George Bush. In this speech, Bush described Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as a terrorist alliance threatening the peace of the world, likening them to the Axis powers of World War II. And the thing is, that speech was fucking dumb. While all three of the countries listed had shitty governments, none of them were allied with each other. Iran and Iraq in particular had very tense relations, because of the whole war thing. And the speech was, in many ways, a massive political blunder. Iran at the time was working with the United States in Afghanistan to fight the Taliban and capture al-Qaeda. But after the United States compared Iran to the Nazis, they stopped cooperating. More generally, calling other nations evil states that must be destroyed shuts down any diplomatic relationship with those nations. And when diplomacy is gone, all that remains is war. And when the United States goes to war, thousands of civilians die. But, to be honest, the Axis of Evil speech worked. David Frum wanted to write a speech that would make Americans accept the war on terror, and this speech helped them accept it. It made dumbass Americans believe the outside world was a dangerous cabal of subhumans who existed only to kill. It made them think it was America versus North Korea and the Muslims. It certainly helped make this film's writers think that. Back in Mount Rushmore, we are introduced to Michael Moore, who is fat. That's the joke, that he's fat. Parker and Stone had a bone to pick with Moore because he interviewed them for Bowling with Columbine, then showed a cartoon aping their style. That cartoon that says the NRA is racist, and I mean, it's right that the NRA is racist, but the actual history shown isn't accurate, that cartoon. And to be honest, I thought that cartoon was made by Parker and Stone until I began writing this essay, so fair enough, I guess. Michael Moore sneaks into the base and destroys it with a suicide bomb. And you know what? I salute you, mocking caricature of Michael Moore. You're the best person in this film. Michael Moore just destroyed the base of a dangerous terrorist cell responsible for the deaths of thousands of civilians, and he did it without injuring a single innocent. I don't think the thing the film wants me to take away is that Michael Moore is a hero, but honestly, that's the only takeaway that makes sense. The film then cuts back to North Korea, where Kim Jong-il sings a song called I'm So Lonely, and the joke, and I'm going to have to explain it very slowly because it's a very complicated joke. The joke is that Kim Jong-il is Asian and thus has an accent. I know, such witty commentary, so fucking funny. Really, I got handed to this film's writers for being brilliant enough to come up with that idea. Such groundbreaking work, such incredible comedy that they stole from Breakfast at Tiffany's. And people in the comments will say, actually being racist is just making fun of everyone equally. And no, it fucking isn't. This film does not mock white people for being white. It mocks white people for their personal characteristics, and mocks people of color for not being white. It's just a bunch of racist bullshit that everyone's okay with because they say, lol, just kidding, at the end. God, this is why I don't watch South Park. It uses a lot of edgy bigotry as a crutch to get away with not being very funny. A lot of South Park is, okay, we've got a boring scene, how can we make it better? I know, just say fuck the Jews, that'll distract from our lack of ideas, brilliant, this'll win us an Emmy! And I haven't really seen much South Park, but I've turned the TV off every time I've seen an episode because it was so bad. Maybe I've only ever seen the bad episodes. Okay, let's think. What have I seen? I've seen the one where there's the taco that shits ice cream, the one that compares black people to zombies because they don't want to be hunted for sport by white supremacists, the one with Oprah's vagina, the one where Jesus boxes Satan, the one with the wheel that fucks you in the ass, and the one that calls bikers a slur for gay people a ton. And I think the Jesus boxing one was the only one I really enjoyed. And I don't know, maybe there are better South Park episodes, but the little I've seen has been just abysmal. Like, I don't get how people enjoy South Park. I'm gonna have to watch some South Park, aren't I?
I'm going down to South Park, gonna have myself a time.
Friendly faces everywhere, humble folks without temptation.
Okay, let's do this. Let's watch South Park, and the first episode on the list is about how the Jews aren't human and secretly control the world. Fuck me, this is gonna suck!
16 hours later.
Okay, I watched 3 seasons of South Park, and that's about as much as I can stomach. Gonna be real, still not a fan of South Park. And honestly, it wasn't even the offensiveness. There are definitely vile episodes of South Park that I hated, but those were a definite minority. And to be fair, there were a few South Park episodes that I genuinely enjoyed. Casa Bonita, Toilet Paper, Good Times with Weapons, Osimo, The Losing Edge. There were a handful of South Park episodes that I thought were good. I didn't expect to like so many episodes. That's not to say there aren't parts of those episodes I dislike, like the anti-Semitism in The Losing Edge was a bit much, but overall, yeah, there were a few decent episodes. And there were occasional good jokes in a lot of the other episodes. In addition to the episodes I hated and the ones I begrudgingly enjoyed, there's a third, far more common category of South Park episodes. The boring ones. A lot of the episodes I watched were just dull. I stand by what I said earlier about South Park, that it uses edginess as a crutch. And there are problems with many of the episodes too dull to talk about, like, for example, Passion of the Jew repeats anti-Semitic bullshit about Jews killing Jesus, and Something Walmart This Way Comes places blame on poor people for Walmart's success rather than on Walmart's shady business tactics, but to be honest, I don't have much to say about most of the episodes I'm not going to talk about. So many of them are like Fat Butt and Pancake Head, an episode that is just one joke again and again and again that wasn't even funny the first time and only gets worse every time it's repeated. Actually, now that I think about it, there is a fourth type of South Park episode, a category I like to call episodes that will put you on an FBI watch list. That list only includes the episode Raisins. Oh boy, that one was uncomfortable for a completely unique reason! South Park fans have probably figured out from the titles I listed that I chose seasons 7, 8, and 9 to watch. These were the seasons that came out before, at the same time as, and immediately after Team America World Police, respectively. I figured that they would give a good insight into Parker and Stone's headspace when they were writing the movie that this video is ostensibly about. And as far as I can tell, these seasons are fairly popular among South Park fans, with both Looper and the Top 10s naming Season 8 as the best season. I figured this would be a good batch of episodes to discuss. Overall, there were only 7 or so episodes that I had enough to talk about to make it into this video. Those being, I'm a Little Bit Country, Butt Out, Goobax, Douche and Turd, Mr. Garrison's Fancy New Vagina, Follow That Egg, and Ginger Kids. Let's jump right in with the episode most relevant to this video. In this episode, South Park is fiercely divided over the invasion of Iraq. At the end of the episode, Cartman meets the Founding Fathers, whom the episode calls the smartest thinkers the world has ever seen, which is some American civil religion nationalist cult bullshit. Ben Franklin explains that the Founding Fathers actually intended for America to be a war-hungry and violent nation, but allowed people to have freedom of speech so they could protest their government. Not because the government would listen to the people, but so America wouldn't look bad when it starts wars. Cartman repeats this, explaining that America should invade Iraq over bullshit reasons, because otherwise, America will be taken over by the terrorists! Or China, I guess. But also we need pussy protesters because otherwise people will hate America. Except Parker and Stone got really pissed when people protested the Iraq War and made a whole movie about how people need to shut the fuck up and blindly support the troops, so I guess you don't need pussy protesters. This episode, much like Team America World Police, supports and defends American interventionism on the grounds of freedom isn't free. And I've already torn that apart. And quite frankly, I think this episode should be criticized for taking that stance. Like, South Park gets away with making horseshit political arguments for 2 reasons. One of them is that they're centrists, and thus immune to criticism, I guess. They make fun of both sides equally. Except, very often, they don't. This episode flat out states that one side is correct and one is wrong. You can't take the enlightened centrism middle ground on all issues. Either you invade Iraq or you don't. And South Park takes a stance. They take a stance that the invasion of Iraq was moral. And the thing is, I don't think there is an intrinsic value in saying, yeah, but both sides are bad. I think the obsession with centrism and the middle ground is one of the most dangerous ideologies in modern America. There are some issues where you have to take a stand. When the fight is over whether other Americans should be awarded basic civil rights, or if tens of thousands of civilians should be brutally murdered by an invading army, there is no honor in being neutral. Neutrality is a privilege only afforded to those not affected by politics. Whether or not Iraqis are murdered matters a lot more to Iraqi civilians than it does to a pair of smug actors from the US. And, in all honesty, I am glad that South Park frequently drops the charade of neutrality and takes a stand. I just wish Parker and Stone chose better places to take that stand. Speaking of which, the episode Butt Out is, without exaggeration, the worst half an hour of television I have ever seen. There are other episodes that are more offensive, other episodes that argue more repugnant things, but no episode of this show that I've seen is so incredibly angry and mean-spirited. When he wrote this episode, Trey Parker had something to say, and it was so important to him to rant about it that he forgot to write any good jokes. This episode exists to take on a political adversary that no one else has the courage to go after. Anti-smoking groups. Yeah, it's an episode that portrays tobacco companies as kind, friendly people who don't want to hurt anyone, and people who dislike them as monstrous murderers. And this episode accomplishes the Herculean task of defending tobacco companies by rapid firing off a series of ridiculous arguments. First, they argue that people just need to take personal responsibility and quit smoking. Except, that ignores the existence of chemical dependency. Nicotine rewires your brain to make it so you become ill if you try to quit. People often cannot quit because their own bodies try to kill them if they stop smoking. And the argument of, just take personal responsibility, bro, is such a fucking cop-out. Like, I have family who smoke. Lifetime smokers who fucking hate it, who want nothing more than to quit, and have failed again and again every time they've tried. Smoking is a chemical addiction. It isn't as simple as South Park makes it out to be. And to say, well, if you want to stop smoking, just stop smoking, perfectly displays the smug arrogance that defines South Park. The inability to understand addiction shows up again in the episode Bloody Mary, where Parker and Stone are indignant at the idea that alcoholism is a disease. But addiction is a disease. Like, according to doctors who have spent their lives studying it, addiction is a disease. Like, you wanted to listen to experts instead of celebrities when it came to Iraq? Well, why aren't you listening to them when they talk about addiction? And yeah, Bloody Mary has a point about AA being kinda culty, but that doesn't distract from the fact that saying, well, just stop drinking, bro, it's easy, is fucking stupid. Back to Butt Out. The episode argues that tobacco companies aren't doing anything wrong, because they're just selling a product to people who willingly choose to buy and consume it. Informed consent and all that jazz. Except, consent is complicated when you rewire someone's brain to alter their choices. Again, there are people who want to stop smoking but can't, and I would argue that selling poison to people who have no choice but to consume it is evil. And of course, tobacco companies don't just sell tobacco to people who already smoke. They're companies, they're contractually obligated to grow and make more money. So, they advertise. They scheme to get more people addicted to cigarettes. And often, they target children. And this is somewhat illegal now thanks to the work of anti-smoking activists like the ones this episode hates, but that was a relatively new development when this episode came out. And I don't think that manipulating children into committing suicide is the morally neutral business transaction based on informed consent that this episode treats it as. Speaking of informed consent, the argument that, well, yeah, they sell poison, but everyone knows it's poison, might be true today, but it definitely wasn't true a few decades ago. Tobacco companies spent millions funding fake studies to keep people from knowing smoking caused cancer. You can't have informed consent when the greatest misinformation campaign in human history makes you believe cigarettes are harmless. And sure, the lies of tobacco companies were eventually stamped out, but by then they already had millions addicted. A massive chunk of the tobacco industry's current customers are people who became addicted back when tobacco companies were lying to us. And the biggest argument for the evil of modern tobacco companies comes from the fact that they have for years now been genetically modifying tobacco to be more addictive. It's hard to quit because they have spent years making tobacco impossible to quit. If they really believed in informed consent and people choosing to smoke, then they wouldn't have to breed tobacco to be more addictive. Modern cigarettes are also deadlier than the cigarettes of the 60s, a side effect of genetically engineering cigarettes to be more addictive. And it is bullshit to say, but personal responsibility, to someone who started smoking in the 50s because of ads targeting teenagers, didn't know it was bad for decades because of the misinformation campaign, and by the time they knew it was bad were too addicted to stop due to tobacco companies making cigarettes more addictive. Putting all these factors together, no! Tobacco companies aren't just kindly people who believe in people being allowed to do what they want. They're violent, cruel murderers who kill people for money. If tobacco companies could get away with making smoking mandatory, enforced by the police on threat of death, they would do it in a goddamn heartbeat. The kindly tobacco employees in this episode also say that without tobacco slave plantations, all of our black friends wouldn't be Americans, and holy shit, I do not have the time to unpack all of the different ways that is fucked up. This episode is also pissy about people not being allowed to smoke in bars. And that's kind of weird, right? I thought the whole thing was personal responsibility. You don't choose to have someone sitting next to you kill you via secondhand smoke. Maybe smokers should take personal responsibility and stop smoking inside. This is honestly the biggest example of libertarian hypocrisy that South Park ever gives, aside from the whole encouraging military violence thing. Libertarians like Parker and Stone don't believe in people being able to do what they want. They believe in them being able to do what they want, and other people having to deal with it. Freedom to them is them having the right to kill you, and you having the right to die. But oh, I forgot. Secondhand smoke isn't real. That's another thing this episode argues. And here I was thinking that they wanted to listen to experts, not celebrities. I guess the guys from basketball know more about lung cancer than the CDC. This episode also makes a weird classism argument, saying that because poor people smoke more often, hating tobacco companies means you hate poor people. And like, what? Tobacco companies disproportionately targeting poor people isn't the argument for their benevolence that you think it is. And it isn't just some random coincidence that poor people smoke more. They smoke more, in a large part, due to tobacco companies advertising more often in poorer neighborhoods. They also, by the way, advertise more often in Black and Hispanic regions for some reason. The symbol of this episode's contempt for anti-smoking advocates is director Rob Reiner. And he is fat! And he eats burgers because he is fat! And you may be thinking, didn't they do the exact same joke with Michael Moore? And the answer is yes, because they are fucking lazy. Rob Reiner acts like a violent, delusional murderer throughout the episode, unlike those nice, kind tobacco companies that everyone needs to be nice to. At one point, the episode says that anti-smoking advocates use bogus studies to go after tobacco companies, which is infuriatingly backwards. Rob Reiner's plan in this episode is to kill Cartman to prove secondhand smoke is real, because you know, that's who the real child murderers are, the people who don't like it when tobacco companies advertise to children. At the end of the episode, we receive the obligatory speech from Stan and Kyle about what the audience should believe, and it is just wonderful. The writer's stand-ins eloquently explain that Rob Reiner is a fascist, because he wants to force other people to think like he does. And that is quite possibly the dumbest political statement I have ever heard. First off, fascism is a specific, complicated political ideology. It doesn't just mean anyone you don't like. It certainly doesn't mean anyone who wants to change people's minds. And they say force, but the real Rob Reiner is a goddamn activist. he holds no power. They're saying advocating for an idea is the same as fascism because, fascists like it when people agree with them, a trait they share with no other group of people. And I shouldn't have to point out why the idea that advocating an ideology is actually fascism is fucking stupid. But in case it wasn't obvious, Parker and Stone are fascists by their own logic. They advocate political stances. They want people to agree with them. That makes them fascists, I guess.
Fuck, this show is so stupid!
Before we leave Season 7, there is one more episode I want to talk about briefly, and that is It's a Christmas in Canada. Most of this episode is dull with the occasional good joke, but there are two moments in this episode that I want to talk about. First off, this episode introduced me to the reoccurring South Park character, Tuong Lu Kim. He's Chinese. I'll give you 3 guesses as what the main joke with him is. That's right! The joke is he's Asian and has an accent! How is it possible to make so many goddamn Breakfast at Tiffany's jokes and have it not get old? But more importantly, I want to talk about this episode's main villain, a Canadian guy named Scott the Dick. Scott is angered by the boys coming to Canada and tells them to leave, saying he doesn't want America to be the world police. And there isn't much more in this episode I want to talk about. Like, Saddam Hussein shows up in what I assume is some sort of callback, but the Season 7 Christmas special is otherwise fairly apolitical. But I want to note this moment, this resentment Parker and Stone have towards people who dislike American interventionalism, because it ties into the film's themes. The episode Goobacks is about immigration. In it, a bunch of immigrants move to the US and destroy the economy by stealing jobs, something that angers the residents of South Park. And by immigrants, I mean time travelers. Ooh, it's a metaphor. Specifically, they are time travelers fleeing a future destroyed by overpopulation, which forces me to bring up the fact that overpopulation is a myth made up by white supremacists. I don't feel like ranting about that again, just go watch The Life and Times of Steve Rogers. Like many South Park episodes, Goobacks attempts to take a neutral stance and mock both sides equally. It portrays conservatives as racist idiots and liberals as out-of-touch douchebags. But, much like I'm a Little Bit Country, the episode ultimately ends with saying that one side is right. At the end of the episode, Stan gives a speech where he says that immigrants need to leave. Oh sure, he says that slurs are bad, something that every other South Park episode I've seen disagrees with, and that immigrants are just ordinary people trying to make their lives better, but ultimately he says that immigration is a problem. And this brings me to another reason why this self-righteous centrism is often not as middle of the road as people think. Often, people's disagreements on politics are not just over what action, if any, the state should take, but rather over basic facts of reality. Like, back when this episode came out, the climate change debate was less about what to do about climate change, and more about whether or not it even existed. In the 2000s, people arguing over gay rights weren't just arguing about whether or not gay people should be allowed to get married, they were arguing over if being gay was even a thing. Conservatives argued that A, being gay was a choice, and B, that gay people were all pedophiles that needed to be locked up. Side note, the things the right said about gay people 20 years ago are the exact same things they say about trans people now, because they haven't changed at all. Immigration, both in 2004 and today, is an issue where the very facts being debated are just as important as the policies that are being debated. Goobacks treats the ideas that A, immigrants steal jobs, and B, immigrants make things worse as true facts. But neither of those ideas are accurate. The idea that population increasing would mean jobs are being taken away doesn't really make much sense when you think about it. Like, say there's a town of 1,000, and they have 10 restaurants. Then 100 people immigrate to the town, and a few of them get jobs at those 10 restaurants. But, because the town now has more people, an 11th restaurant opens up in town. Immigrants getting jobs at the original restaurants does not take away jobs, because increases in population also necessarily increase the amount of work that needs to be done. In fact, a lot of economists have argued that immigration actually lowers unemployment, because immigrants are generally younger and more likely to open businesses than the average American. Immigrants also pay far more in taxes than they take in welfare and are half as likely to commit crimes than non-immigrants. By every metric except the racist ones, immigration makes the country better. But Parker and Stone either don't know or refuse to acknowledge those realities. They choose the conservative worldview that immigration takes jobs and then base their policy decisions off that worldview. Saying both sides are dumb falls short when you already think one side is right about everything. And also, even if immigrants stole jobs, so fucking what? Are you owed a job just for existing? I thought capitalists like Parker and Stone wanted corporations to hire whoever is best for the job. If racist dumbfuck Americans don't get hired, then tough shit. You shouldn't argue for mass government violence just because you don't get hired. I've had companies hire other people instead of me before. That doesn't mean I think everyone who gets a job that I want should be arrested. While we're talking about immigration, one popular liberal argument that this episode toys with is that immigrants just work crappy low-wage jobs that no one else wants. That isn't a good thing! The fact that immigrants are horrifically underpaid is bad! It is fucked up that American businessmen use the vulnerable state of undocumented immigrants to force them to work for pennies. Like, God, this argument is 2 steps away from saying, but without slavery, who would pick the cotton? That idea I mentioned earlier, that people think of Latin America as just one big pile of resources the United States rightfully owns, is something that even progressive liberals occasionally advocate. Except, in this case, the resources are Latino bodies rather than fruit. I'd also like to argue that tough border policies would still be wrong even if immigration wasn't good for the economy. I think people should be able to travel between nations because killing a person for stepping over an imaginary line is wrong. Thousands of people have died crossing the US border in the past 20 years. And it is ridiculous that Parker and Stone, self-described libertarians, advocated that thousands of people should be murdered by the government to enforce arbitrary laws that do nothing to keep us safe. Hey, speaking of libertarian hypocrisy, what happened to the idea of everyone just doing whatever's best for them? In this episode, Parker and Stone argue that immigrants should go back to their own countries and fix things there. But since when are people obligated to work to fix their countries? I thought the whole thing was doing whatever's best for you. Everyone else be damned. Let's see, the next episode on the list is... Oh god, not that one! The next episode on the list is Douche and Turd. Part of the reason I hate this episode so much is that Parker and Stone are, in some ways, right. I can't just dismiss this episode completely for being smug and self-righteous, because they do, to an extent, have a point. Voting is rarely enough politically. Voting will not save us from capitalism or the state. Voting is often choosing the lesser of two evils, a band-aid at best. But the takeaway from that is that you need to do more than voting, not that you should just stop giving a shit. If voting isn't enough, then you need to help with mutual aid. You need to protest. You need to do things that I'm not going to be specific about because I do not like having my YouTube channel taken down. You don't just vote, you do more. There's this idea in American politics that voting is both the starting point and the ending point of politics, which is ridiculous. And this episode, although it mocks voting, also seems to believe that is true. It doesn't tell you to do more than voting. It tells you voting is all you can do, and voting sucks, so why give a shit about anything? I'd also like to argue against the idea that voting is completely pointless. I've seen this idea popping up more and more on the left, and I'm not too thrilled about it. Yes, voting will not fix every problem, but that doesn't mean it's pointless. Roe v. Wade would not have been overturned if not for decades of consistent, determined voting by the right. That's not to say that voting was the only thing that led to Roe v. Wade being overturned. Republicans also utilized blatant political corruption, constant propaganda, and a constant stream of terrorist attacks. Hey, remember that time Bill O'Reilly repeatedly told his fans to murder a specific doctor, and then one of his fans murdered the guy, and then Fox News kept him on the air for several more years? Fucked up we don't talk about that more. Oh, and don't fucking be pedantic and go, actually, he never said to murder George Tiller. He just said that every member of Al-Qaeda should be killed, and that George Tiller was as evil as Al-Qaeda, and that someone should do something to stop that doctor. Shut the fuck up. Bill O'Reilly is a murderer. Voting is a tool. It is not useful in every situation, nor is it the only tool we need to use. But instead of advocating that we need to use more than one tool, South Park argues to toss the whole toolbox into the river because one tool doesn't always work. I also really don't like the both sides are equally bad so don't give a shit view. Because no, they aren't. Both are shitty. One is so shitty that it's gonna kill us all. Like, this episode was about the 2004 election, and I don't like John Kerry, but he didn't support a constitutional amendment restricting gay rights. He didn't censor scientists who spoke out about the dangers of global warming. And he sure as fuck did not believe he was on a divine mission to invade Iraq and cause the biblical apocalypse because of a dream he had once. Like, one candidate was clearly much better in 2004. It's less a douche and a turd, and more a douche sitting on the ground, and a flaming turd sitting on top of 10 tons of dynamite. Both suck, but one is going to kill a hell of a lot more people. And yes, both parties are bad, but that's because they're both right-wing capitalists who like war. The solution isn't centrism, the solution is left-wing policies. Actually, left-wing policies, not the bullshit centrist, I'm mostly proud of what we've done in Afghanistan bullshit. And the worst part of this episode is that it just isn't funny. It's so preachy, so whiny, so goddamn self-righteous and arrogant that it's obnoxious. It's an episode where Parker and Stone whine about how hard it is to be so much smarter than everyone else, to be the only ones wise enough to see the folly of electoralism, to have to exist in a world where other people insist that voting matters. Oh God, have mercy on these brave men! Blessed are the smug, for they are forced to endure the slings and arrows of other people being annoyed at their douchebaggery. There's this old, deleted Reddit comment that gets shared around a lot that captures the smug self-righteousness of South Park better than anything I could ever write. I would like to quote that comment now. South Park has always been fundamentally reactionary. Those pushing for change are wrong no matter what change they push for. Nothing is a bigger crime to Matt and Trey than giving a shit. Their ideology is apathetic libertarian. Whether you're on the left or the right, if you're asking me to change my behavior, you suck. As it stands, the political left tends to push for more change than the political right does. As it stands, Matt and Trey admit they dislike conservatives and really fucking hate liberals. It isn't about left or right, it's about change versus comfort. If you're trying to change something, they think you're annoying. And they think you're lame because caring about stuff is lame. It's the same attitude that establishes you mad and butthurt as the ultimate trump cards. In internet arguments, caring is for losers, and if you become personally invested in politics, you're part of the problem. Uncritical, detached acceptance of the status quo is the only morally upright posture, and those who draw a distinction between is and ought are all smug bullies, outlandish freaks, and or close-minded zealots. It's a show that teaches its audience to become lazy and self-satisfied, that praises them for being uncritically accepting of their own biases, and provides them with an endless buffet of thought-terminating cliches suitable for shutting down all manner of challenges to their comfort zones. South Park is a place where you never have to have your assumptions challenged. It's a place where you're always right. You shouldn't bother to think, and the people asking you to change your mind are annoying busybodies and prigs who should just shut up and leave you alone. South Park is, if you excuse the expression, a safe space. And if we're going to fix the world, then we need to do more than chill in Parker and Stone's safe space. I knew as soon as I saw the title Douche and Turd that I would hate this episode, because this episode influenced American politics. I heard this shit, this don't vote because it's just a douche or a turd, constantly in 2016. Honestly, a lot of the shitty jokes from South Park have entered the public lexicon. I've definitely heard the take her jabs shit before. And that's kind of bad, right? That these guys consistently have real influence on politics. There's a whole term for the phenomena, South Park Republican. I've heard others argue that South Park created the alt-right, and personally I put more blame on forums like 4chan, but it's undeniable that the alt-right adores South Park. Because, despite their relentless centrism, Parker and Stone like the right far more than the left. Centrism is a useful tool for the alt-right, because if you don't care about politics, you don't fight to stop them. And if South Park funnels some to the right but most to apathy, then that's undeniably a win for fascists. There is no honor to be found in centrism when one side wants to commit genocide. There is no honor in centrism when it comes to LGBT rights or the environment or immigration. Often, apathy makes you complicit. And worse, it makes you fucking annoying. Fuck, what's left? What the fuck do you want me to say about this episode? Is it bad? Yeah, of course it's bad. Is it transphobic? Of fucking course it is. Is its logic so bad that it unintentionally argues that any woman over the age of 60 isn't female? Yep. Does it treat the fact that gender reassignment surgery is gross as an argument for people to not have it? Well, shit then. I guess no one should ever have heart surgery because heart surgery is really gross. This episode is vile. It's dehumanizing. It's mean-spirited, and I hate it. I'm not going to sit here and argue in favor of trans rights. The idea that this is treated as a debate instead of a discussion of basic human decency is sickening. Trans liberation now, transphobes can go fuck themselves, all that jazz. And don't try to say, I'm basic biology. Shut the fuck up. Biologists say you're wrong. Neuroscientists say you're wrong. Psychologists say you're wrong. Doctors say you're wrong. Fucking anthropologists say you're wrong. People who've spent their entire lives studying this almost universally agree that gender is not a strict binary based on chromosomes, and that trans people are the gender they say they are. The facts don't care about your feelings, assholes. Opposing the basic reality of trans people's lived experiences is about as scientific as believing in the flat earth. Or in thinking that climate change is fake. Real glad that I'm not watching season 10. Ugh, you know, in that Chappelle video, I mocked him for stealing jokes from this episode specifically. And God, it is embarrassing how uncreative transphobes are. They've been doing the same jokes for decades. The fucking attack helicopter thing wasn't funny when South Park did it in 2005, and it sure as hell isn't funny in 2022. I'm sick of this show. I didn't enjoy watching it. It's always smug or boring or both. I did not enjoy my time watching South Park. What else do you want me to say? Was the Katrina episode good? No! Was the hippie episode self-righteous? Of fucking course it was. What can I say about South Park that I haven't already said? Follow That Egg is good? Question mark? I mean, it's an average quality episode, and oh boy is it slur heavy. But yeah, Follow That Egg is decent politically. It is an episode that makes it very clear that gay people should have marriage rights and that homophobes are childish assholes. Although I would like to note one line that annoys me. At one point, a man opposing gay rights says, "We don't hate homosexuals, we just don't want them to be able to get married." And that is not historically accurate. A lot of homophobes hated gay people. A lot of them kidnapped and tortured gay people. A lot of them murdered gay people. And honestly, I would argue that thinking gay people should not be able to marry means you hate them. It doesn't matter if you're friendly about it. Fighting to keep other people from having rights makes you a hateful asshole. But yeah, overall, a decent B- episode. And fortunately, there's only one more episode I have to watch. I have less to say about Ginger Kids as an episode. As an episode, it's fairly average, and more to say about its impact on the world. This episode supposedly led to several real beatings of children with red hair. And it's debatable how much responsibility South Park had for those attacks. In the show's defense, the episode never actually talks about a Kick a Ginger Day. But still, this is a thing I remember from when I was a kid. I remember jokes about beating the shit out of redheads and being vaguely aware that it came from South Park. And the possibility that South Park inspired children to genuinely hate redheads is really disturbing. A, because it led to kids getting their shit kicked in, and B, more importantly, because South Park doesn't just go after redheads. The main group South Park goes after is Jewish people. And to be honest, anti-Semitism is a much more serious issue than redhead phobia. Like, if one episode targeting ginger kids led to 3 beatings, how many beatings did decades of constant anti-Semitism lead to? I remember growing up in a small conservative town like the one in South Park, where Jew was used as an insult by my peers. And that's not all on South Park, or even mostly on South Park, but still, the constant anti-Semitism keeps stereotypes alive. Parker and Stone made a cartoon for children where they teach the kids all the cool Nazi shit they know, and that's gonna have an effect on how they see the world. And yes, South Park is a show for children. I know it's R-rated, children love things that are R-rated. Regardless of Parker and Stone's intentions, South Park is a show that appeals primarily to edgy 12-year-olds who think they're smarter than everyone else because they're centrists. Because this is a show written by a pair of edgelord teenagers who never grew up. I think there is a real discussion to be had about the impact South Park had on its viewers. And I don't have a good answer on how much harm was caused, or whether or not Parker and Stone can really be blamed for that, but it isn't something that can be ignored. The other interesting thing about Ginger Kids is that the bigotry expressed in the episode is real. On the DVD commentary, Parker admits to having a racial prejudice against redheads. And that sounds like a joke, but no, he's genuine. He admits to having left a woman once because her mother had red hair and he was worried about having red-haired children. In this episode, a character jokingly says that you should marry an Asian woman because that way your children won't have red hair. Trey Parker is married to a Japanese woman. And setting aside the creepy fetishization of Asians, the fact that Parker's dislike of redheads is genuine completely changes everything. Because if that bigotry is real, what else is real? He can admit that he mocks redheads because of a genuine bigotry because redhead hatred isn't really a widespread issue, but he can't do the same for the anti-Semitism. Which bigotries are true and which are irony? Is the transphobia real? Is the racism? The Islamophobia is definitely more than ironic, I would argue. At the end of the day, I can't be sure how much of South Park is irony and how much of it is genuine. But at least some of it is genuine. And, to be frank, would the show look much different if the anti-Semitism was more than ironic? Now, before I end this, there is something that I need to acknowledge. I am arguing against ghosts. The men who created these episodes are dead now. Like, metaphorically dead. Parker and Stone are still alive. 17 years is enough time for people to change dramatically. I've heard that some of the later seasons of South Park are more progressive, but to be honest, the idea of watching South Park episodes on cancel culture or the 2016 election sounds about as much fun as swallowing shards of broken glass. But even if Parker and Stone have changed, their work is still out there. Team America and early South Park are still being watched, still influencing people, and they deserve a 2-hour video essay, honestly more at this point, complaining about them. Anyway, that's it. I finished watching South Park, which means I can end the video and... Oh, right. I still have to finish the goddamn film!
America, fuck yeah! Coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah!
Okay, let's think. Where were we last? Let's see. The Rushmore base was destroyed by American hero Michael Moore. The team got captured by the North Korean military. And Gary was depressed because he blamed himself for all the deaths he caused. Gary stumbles into a bar and tells a drunken old man that he's a dick. The old man says, "Being a dick ain't so bad. See, there are 3 kinds of people. Dicks, pussies, and assholes. Pussies think everyone can get along, and dicks just want to fuck all the time without thinking it through. But then you got your assholes, and all the assholes want is to shit all over everything. So pussies may get mad at dicks once in a while because pussies get fucked by dicks, but dicks also fuck assholes. And if they didn't fuck assholes, you know what you get? You get your dick and your pussy all covered in shit." This is this film's main moral argument. Like, this is what this film is about. This speech about pussies and assholes and dicks. It's what all of this movie has been building to. And I need you to treat the speech with the revere and deep analysis that you would give to Nietzsche or Voltaire. Because if you think about that quote for a moment, you realize it isn't a philosophy unique to this movie. This speech is a rewritten version of the famous Wolves, Sheep, and Sheepdogs essay, which was quoted in American Sniper. In that film, Wayne Kyle says there are 3 types of people in the world: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. Some people prefer to believe that evil doesn't exist in the world, and if it ever darkened their doorsteps, they wouldn't know how to protect themselves. Those are the sheep. Then you've got the predators who use violence to prey on the weak. They're the wolves. And then there are those blessed with the gift of aggression, an overpowering need to protect the flock. These men are the rare breed who live to confront the wolf. They are the sheepdog. And that is almost identical to that pussy dick asshole speech. Side note, that is the 3rd time I've mentioned American Sniper. 4th if you count me mocking Chris Kyle in the Blackout video. Have I unknowingly Beetlejuiced the spirit of Chris Kyle? Am I haunted now? Fuck, do I have to do an American Sniper video? That sounds awful! Don't make me do an American Sniper video! The sheep, wolves, and sheepdog thing didn't originate with the movie American Sniper. That film took it from the book On Combat by David Grossman. Although that book came out in September of 2004, and this film came out in October, but this movie took 2 years to write. Is it theoretically possible that Parker, Stone, and Brady came up with this first? The wolves, sheep, sheepdog philosophy, or the dick, pussy, asshole philosophy if you prefer, sorts the world into three distinct groups. Victims who have no agency, scary monsters who are evil because they are evil, and the good guys who can do no wrong and are always justified in killing because after all, they're the good guys and their enemies are evil for the sake of evil, so they should be allowed to do whatever. And that's not a good philosophy. To start, it allows its adherents to be fine with doing anything, no matter how awful. After all, you're the sheepdog, you're the good guy, you're defined by doing good, thus everything you do is good. If you, I don't know, blow up a fucking hospital, that isn't evil, because you're a sheepdog, you're the good guy. Sheepdogs don't hurt the flock. And your enemies, well, your enemies aren't even human. They don't have motives. They can't have legitimate grievances that they're fighting for. They are evil because it is their nature to be evil. They're so evil that they deserve to be given no quarter. They're so evil that they need to be exterminated. And you're the good guy carrying out that good old genocide of wolves. And, of course, this philosophy ties perfectly into racism. It's a lot easier to think of your enemies as part of a group of inhuman monsters if you already consider them inferior for not being white. It's easy to get along with this philosophy if you consider your enemies to be a race of, to quote Chris Kyle, savages. And besides, wolves aren't born from sheep. They come from families of wolves. If a country has wolves, then it's better to turn it to glass to get rid of them, because any sheep you see are just wolves in disguise. Because you're the sheepdog. You can do no evil. Your job is to kill the wolves. But the thing is, sheepdogs are wolves. Like, that's where this metaphor breaks down. Sheepdogs are quite literally wolves. Like, Canis lupus familiaris. And even if we go along with the metaphor, men who consider themselves to be sheepdogs are often indistinguishable from the men they call wolves. After all, what is raping and murdering a 14-year-old and her family other than the actions of a wolf? What is killing a child, stripping him naked, cutting up his corpse for trophies, and then posing for photographs? Our military is filled with wolves, but these self-described sheepdogs don't care about killing them. According to sheepdogs like Chris Kyle, the worst thing you can do is kill one of those wolves he hangs out with. These sheepdogs spend a hell of a lot more time killing enemy sheep than they do stopping American wolves. You know, to be fair, there is a small difference between the dicks, pussies, asshole thing and the sheep, wolves, sheepdogs thing. An acknowledgement that dicks / sheepdogs / the US military fuck pussies / sheep / civilians. And by fuck, I mean brutally murder. But the way this film sees it, that's fine. Because dicks also fuck assholes. Because soldiers kill terrorists, it's fine if they also kill civilians. Sometimes sheepdogs tear apart sheep with their teeth, but it's fine because they also kill the wolves. The thing is, it doesn't matter to the sheep if it is killed by the teeth of a wolf or by those of a sheepdog. The sheep is still dead. The civilians mercilessly slain by bombs from above are still blasted to bits. The pussies are still fucked. And I don't agree that dicks fucking pussies is okay because they also fuck assholes. The sheep, wolves, sheepdog thing is part of a larger philosophy created by David Grossman called Killology. Soldiers love Killology, but the main group that Grossman teaches his ideas to are cops. Grossman has made a career out of teaching cops to kill innocent people. Dave Grossman travels around the country teaching cops that A, their lives are in danger at every moment, and B, they need to be ready to shoot first and ask questions later. His seminars are little more than montages of cops being killed. Grossman wants cops to treat every scenario like it's life or death. He shows videos of cops being shot during traffic stops, so cops will shoot if someone they pull over makes them feel uncomfortable. And of course, it leads to cops brutally murdering innocent people. And also, he's a crackpot who thinks ISIS has nukes and video games cause mass shootings, so, you know, maybe no one should take him seriously ever. And also, he teaches cops that they'll have the best sex of their lives after they kill someone, and maybe the intersection of state violence and toxic masculinity is a thing to be talked about, but I'd honestly need another 2-hour essay to tackle that one. Grossman's teachings have been linked to multiple murders, most famously the murder of Philandro Castile, an African-American man who was shot 7 times by Officer Geronimo Yanez for the crime of legally owning a gun. The gun was not in Castile's hands. There was a gun in Yanez's hands, of course. And there are asshole bootlickers out there who will go, actually, he had it coming because owning a gun made the cops scared, and cops are allowed to kill anyone who makes them feel scared. And To that I would like to say, A, cops fucking scare me and I have somehow managed to go throughout my whole life without murdering one. And B, what happened to the Second Amendment? Oh, and C, cops are scared of fucking everything. They're scared of screwdrivers. They're scared of hoodies. They're scared of fucking sunglasses. And Grossman teaches cops to be afraid of everything. He wants cops to kill innocent people. He tells cops that they should assume movement means someone is about to attack, but also sitting still means someone is about to attack. He teaches cops that not making eye contact is a sign of aggression, except hold on, Freddie Gray was murdered by the police for not making eye contact. Obligatory mention that half of the people killed by the police are neurodivergent or mentally disabled. If not making eye contact is punishable by death, then I guess autistic people aren't allowed to live anymore. At the end of the day, there is literally nothing you can do to not seem dangerous to the police, because cops are trained to treat everyone as dangerous. Well, there is one thing that makes you seem a bit less dangerous. The horrors of killology are increased tenfold when you remember that a lot of cops are really fucking racist. And don't, actually, that's just a few bad apples. An analysis of 95 million traffic stops by Stanford found that cops are far more likely to pull over black people during the day than at night, because at night they can't tell if the driver is black. Because a statistically significant number of cops are really fucking racist. So you take this ideology of soldiers and you give it to cops who are already racist. To white cops who live in the suburbs but police black neighborhoods, and they believe it completely. They act like soldiers in enemy territory. Every person they pull over is a wolf, and being the good sheepdogs they are, they put the wolves down. They don't treat black people as a flock of sheep to protect, because they have been trained to treat every single person they ever run into as a wolf. The idea of criminals being wolves is a very bad thing for cops to believe, because the job of police is different than that of soldiers. Again, cops ideally shouldn't ever kill. In theory, the job of cops is to arrest people, give them fair trials, then serve them appropriate punishments. And the whole legal system is fucked up, but that is preferable to the shit Grossman wants, where every single crime is punished by death without trial. We cannot treat people who commit crimes as a separate class. We cannot treat them as a separate species that doesn't have rights. Because people who commit crimes are still people. People don't commit crimes because they're part of the secret race of evil that only exists to be evil. They generally commit crimes because of circumstances or emotion. A criminal cannot be rehabilitated under killology. A person cannot make a mistake ever under killology. There are no dumb kids screwing up. There are no addicts who need help. There are no people who do something wrong then work to make it right. There are only wolves. And if your enemy is a wolf, it's better to stop them before they can hurt again. You'd better kill the man who you pulled over for a traffic stop. You better kill that man selling loose cigarettes. You better strangle a man to death for allegedly using a $20 bill. Some cities tried to ban killology back in 2020, but police unions stopped them because police unions are the fucking devil. But even if they succeeded in banning killology, the damage is already done. Our cops have been trained to kill us by a man who says the same shit as this film. One more thing on David Grossman before I get back to the movie. He knows he advocates killing cops, right? I mean, he certainly doesn't believe that, he worships police, but I feel like that's the only logical takeaway from his writings. If it is moral to kill anyone who could potentially be a threat to you, and also cops will kill you in an instant for not making eye contact, then it is morally justified to kill every cop you see. I would not advocate that. Hey, do not take me out of context. Do not clip this. I think killing cops is a bad idea. But that's the only logical takeaway for someone who genuinely believes what Grossman says. And honestly, I can't think of a single moral framework in which cops are moral in killing you for owning a gun, but you are not moral for killing them first. I cannot comprehend a way that someone could think that Geronimo Yanez was justified in murdering Philandro Castile, while not also simultaneously thinking that Philandro Castile would have been justified in shooting that cunt cop the moment he got out of his car. And it is very good for law enforcement that the average person has a better moral conscience than them, because if the average person acted like a cop, every goddamn cop in this country would have a bullet in their head. And I hope, for the sake of all of the cops in this country, that the average person never figures that out. In the wake of the lynching of George Floyd, Killology received a lot of criticism in the media. American Sniper received critique for promoting the same murderous ideology. But no one ever brought up the fact that Team America World Police made the same speech years prior. At least as far as I saw. There have been dozens of think pieces about American Sniper, and very few about this movie, for one very simple reason. Immediately after the sheepdog speech, Gary vomits for like 2 minutes straight. This film is a comedy. It is a very, very stupid, very childish comedy. And that's the perfect shield against criticism. People get pissy when you try to analyze this movie deeply, because it's a satire and shouldn't be taken seriously. But the ideas it spreads still influence people. This film, despite its silliness, wants you to take it seriously and listen to what it has to say. And you can't criticize it without backlash, because hey, it's a comedy! I've been trying to wrap my head around how to best explain the way this film uses comedy as a shield from critique. And at the end of the day, I'm not a good enough writer. So instead, I'm going to quote what A.O. Scott of the New York Times wrote, back when everyone else was praising this movie for being a dumb comedy and mocking both sides. Goofy as they are, the members of Team America are treated, in the end, with affection, even respect, which is part of the film's political gist. When Team America blows things up in other countries, they do it by accident, in the course of their sloppy but zealous fight against the people who want to do it on purpose. This is not a trivial moral distinction, and it is one the film hangs onto in impressive earnest. The obscene patriotic ditty that is the Team America theme song might be hyperbolic and impossible to stop singing, but it is not sarcastic, nor is a speech delivered twice in the course of the action, most powerfully at the climactic moment, that is meant as an answer both to the Hollywood peaceniks and to the wishy-washy world community, whose representatives have gathered in North Korea for a peace conference. Because of its graphic, though metaphorical discussion of human anatomy, I can't quote any of the speech here, but it is one of the most cogent and, dare I say, more nuanced defenses of American military power that I have heard recently. It is conveyed in a language that no politician would dare use by a puppet speaking to a room full of puppets, in the wake of jokes about oral sex, all of which provides about as effective a camouflage as the pink and blue fatigues the Team America agents wear on their operations. Of course Mr. Parker and Mr. Stone are joking. What else is new? But like most good jokers, they also mean exactly what they say. Clever comedians they are, they have rigged Team America with an ingenious anti-critic device, which I find myself unable to diffuse. Much as it may pretend otherwise, this movie has an argument, but if you try to argue back, the joke's on you. Wonderfully put. Although, I would argue, the joke isn't on people who criticize this film. The joke is on the people who refuse to criticize it because, whoa, it's just a fucking dumb comedy, bro, why are you taking it seriously? Trey Parker and Matt Stone played you like a fucking fool, and you're too dumb to realize it. Let's finish this damn film. Alec Baldwin and the Film Actors Guild decide to travel to North Korea and work with Kim Jong-il to put on a big peace conference. Which doesn't really make sense. Since when does Hollywood love North Korea? Again, this film operates under the idea that everyone they don't like is part of this vast global conspiracy to hurt them. Also, Tim Robbins says he wants to persuade everyone to drive hybrid cars and stop smoking. What a terrible fascist! Kim Jong-il meets with the captured Team America and explains his plan to destroy the entire world with WMDs, so that every country is a third world country like North Korea. Okay, first off, gonna be pedantic for a sec. North Korea is not a third world country. The term third world refers to nations not allied with NATO or the Eastern Bloc. North Korea was, by definition, not a third world country. But sure, in the popular lexicon, third world means poor country. But even then, that was not something that Kim Jong-il wanted. He was a dictator who inherited a country and tried to hold on to power forever. God, this movie's plot is geopolitically ridiculous, but also, it wants you to listen to what it has to say about geopolitics. There's a somewhat insidious thing this movie does with how it portrays its heroes and its villains. North Korea is portrayed as thousands of times more dangerous than it was in real life, with more nukes than the rest of the world combined, and a nearly undefeatable army. To contrast, the American military is portrayed as being 6 people and a couple of planes. Obviously, this is not true. The American military is far, far more dangerous than their North Korean counterpart, and would easily decimate North Korea if the two nations were to come to blows. But propaganda can't make people afraid of a foreign power who is weak. So they lie about how strong the enemy is. It makes America the plucky underdogs, instead of the most powerful military that has ever existed. Gary returns to Mount Rushmore and finds it in ruins. Wait, is it Spotswood? I'm pretty sure it's actually Spotswood, but I've been saying Spotswood this whole time. And I called the Louvre the Louvre earlier. Anyway, Spotswood reveals he's about to destroy North Korea to save the world. Gary objects because the team is there. He does not object for any other reason. Spotswood says the team would happily give their lives for the good of the world. And that's true, I guess. But he didn't ask the people of North Korea if they wanted to give their lives up for the rest of the world. Because, in case it wasn't obvious, destroying North Korea would kill countless civilians. Actually, no, not countless. We can count how many people completely destroying the country would kill. More than 20 million civilians killed by Spotswood. That's thousands of 9/11s. That's more people than the fucking Nazis killed. This film ends with a supposedly heroic character trying to outdo the Holocaust, and we're supposed to think he's a good guy. And don't worry, Gary opposes him because his friends are in danger. But fuck the 20 million people living in North Korea, I guess. You know, they did nothing wrong, but fuck it, kill them anyway. Neither Gary nor Spotswood sees this as what it is. The single greatest act of genocide in human history. Because this film does not see the people of countries the US government doesn't like as human. They aren't killing people, they're killing North Koreans. And that's fine, I guess. Jesus fucking Christ, fuck this film! In that Salon article I keep mentioning, Trey Parker described this film as being about the emotion of being hated for being an American. This is something that he clearly thought about a lot, given that Canadian Christmas episode of South Park, where the main villain is a foreigner who hates Americans because of American interventionism. But there doesn't seem to be any desire from this film's writers to analyze what their country does. There's no thought given to how terrorism by the US military makes people resent the US. There's no desire to end that hatred of America by making America better. Only resentment at the idea of being disliked. And I mean, it sucks being hated for the things your country does. Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and Pam Brady are no more guilty for the actions of their government than the people of Iraq or Afghanistan or North Korea. But this film does not have empathy for the people of those countries. They aren't treated as humans. Their deaths are treated as acceptable, because they're from the bad countries that this film hates. This film does not have any desire to deconstruct or criticize Team America, nor the US military for which they stand in. It is a film that acknowledges war crimes, but only so it can shrug its shoulders and say, so what? It's a film whose primary message is that the US military should not be criticized for mass murdering civilians because they keep us safe. Because the enemies they face are so monstrous, they are justified in being even worse monsters. A common theme in this film is responsibility. Gary repeatedly says that he doesn't want to have power thrust upon him, but ultimately realizes that he must use that power to kill. It's almost like a twisted version of Spider-Man's arc words, except the power is military firepower, and the great responsibility is killing bad people. Never does this film talk about the responsibility to not kill civilians, to not blow up buildings and inspire terrorism. No, it sees responsibility in the terms of the United States policing the world. America has the strongest military in human history, and to this film's writers, responsibility means using every ounce of that firepower to eradicate those that they do not like. And if some civilians die, who cares? It is better for civilians to be killed by an American bullet than a foreign bullet, because Americans are the good guys. Gary goes to North Korea and frees the team. They kill the actors, who for some reason are the main line of defense, even though Kim Jong-il has an army. Tim Robbins is killed by a lit cigarette because Parker and Stone love licking the boots of tobacco companies. In the end, it comes down not to a battle of bullets, but a battle of words between Gary Johnston and Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin says that Team America fights for billion-dollar corporations and is as bad as the enemies they fight. And yeah, the US military does fight for corporations. They fight for oil companies. They fight for copper companies. They fight for banana companies. But the one thing they have never fought for is freedom. Gary counters with an elegant speech that overexplains the ideology that this film already made clear. To quote, "We're dicks! We're reckless, arrogant, stupid dicks. And the Film Actors Guild are pussies! And Kim Jong-il is an asshole. Pussies don't like dicks because pussies get fucked by dicks. But dicks also fuck assholes. Assholes who just want to shit on everything. Pussies may think they can deal with assholes their way, but the only thing that can fuck an asshole is a dick with some balls. The problem with dicks is that sometimes they fuck too much, or fuck when it isn't appropriate, and it takes a pussy to show them that. But sometimes pussies get so full of shit that they become assholes themselves. Because pussies are only an inch and a half away from assholes. I don't know much in this crazy, crazy world, but I do know that if you don't let us fuck this asshole, we're gonna have our dicks and our pussies covered in shit." I want you to imagine a country. This violent empire across the sea. This war-obsessed race of monsters. This nation of wolves. A nation of assholes. Assholery is built into their DNA. I mean, look at their history. Centuries of bloodshed, of slaughter. Their leaders aren't elected. They don't believe in fair trials. They imprison countless innocents for political reasons. And their soldiers kill indiscriminately. Men, women, children, they don't care. They blow up buildings full of civilians. They turn villages to rubble. They cause famines. They rape children and kill their families. They cut apart the dead so they can bring their bodies home as trophies. Their soldiers brag about how they don't see enemies as human. How they join the army just because they want to kill. They treat killing like squashing ants. Their leaders are religious extremists who dream of killing millions in service to their god of death. They don't believe in democracy. They hate you for your freedom. They have spent decades systematically murdering democracy on orders of unelected oligarchs. Their government constantly lies. It tells lies that are obviously false to build up justification for war. And their civilians, if you can even call them that, they're so brainwashed they believe the propaganda completely. They want to believe the lies of their government. And these people, this nation of wolves, they have weapons of mass destruction. They have nuclear missiles and are willing to use them. They've used them before on civilians. And now they have come for your people. Like they have come for so many peoples before. And they will kill and kill and kill and kill until they are stopped. And then there's you. You are not a wolf. You're a good guy. You're a sheepdog, and it is your duty to protect the flock. You're a dick ready to fuck some assholes, and you will do anything to win, even if innocent people get hurt, because that's what it takes to end terrorism. So, sure, some civilians die, but who cares? That's a price you're willing to pay. If they didn't want to die, they should have overthrown their government. It's asymmetrical warfare. You can't win a war when you play by the rules your enemies abandon. And this enemy, those disgusting asshole wolves, they don't give up. They keep on killing. They retaliate with even more monstrous acts of terror. The pile of bodies at their feet grows higher and higher till it reaches the heavens. They kill your friends, your brothers in arms, young men who had their whole lives ahead of you. So you'd better keep fighting until every last one of them is dead, until all of the wolves are gone and the sheep can live in peace. Because you are blessed with the gift of aggression. Because you are a sheepdog. Because you are a dick. An eye for an eye has never brought peace. Killing civilians has never ended war. Murdering millions to protect capitalism does not keep us safe. And the ideas you need to justify war crimes. This ideology you must consume to not throw down your gun in horror after seeing the bloodshed. This philosophy of wolves and sheepdogs. It is not the philosophy of good men. It's the kind of idea that inspires men to fly airplanes into skyscrapers. Also, at the end, Kim Jong-il is impaled on the helmet of Kaiser Wilhelm, and then it's revealed he's an alien cockroach.